Hi, good evening, everyone. So, I hope everyone has written the weekly test, or is the suggestion still in vain? Did you try writing the weekly test? Okay, great. So, we were discussing poverty, and we had pretty much discussed everything, every aspect of poverty. There are few other considerations that we have to discuss, and I had asked you a question, if you remember. On Friday, I had asked you a question whether we can look at poverty as a consequence of economic development, and we will come to that. Before that, as a precursor to our discussion on poverty in rural India, because I had asked you another question saying whether poverty in urban areas is basically overflow of rural poverty. So let's look at rural India first. So if you think about rural India, one is that everyone is, like most of the people there, are engaged in either agriculture or allied activities. And also you will find artisans, etc., working in rural areas. Now you see, with time there are multiple factors which have affected agriculture and agricultural economy in India. So let's look at the situation of rural India first. So if you think about small land holdings, because we say that most of our farmers are either small landholders or landless laborers, and we see that this size of this land holding has decreased over the years. That if you think about the concept of transferring property to on the male side. So, for instance, if there's a father, he has passed on the property to two or three of his sons. Now that same land will get divided, and the land holding will go on becoming smaller and smaller. Because of which, you'll find that it will be mostly subsistence agriculture in which they'll be engaged. So they'll need few resources for subsistence agriculture. But the problem is that with dependence on monsoon, and if you think about your small landholders, there is a lot of dependence on monsoon for irrigation facilities, because we do not have the kind of irrigation system as is required. So most of the farmers say most of the farmers depend on monsoon for irrigation. Now with unusual monsoon, with small sizes of the land, they're not able to have a surplus of produce. Yes, agriculture productivity has increased over the years because of modern techniques, but they do not have a lot of surplus. What do? They will try to move away from agriculture. Either they'll try to extract more out of the same land, then slowly, if you remember, that the land will go on degrading because of excessive use of fertilizers, pesticides, etc. Now ultimately they'll start looking for any other alternative apart from agriculture, and they would look towards your industrial areas, they'll look towards service sector, and because of which we'll find the process of urbanization will speed up. But the problem with our industrial sector is that it has not grown as it was supposed to. And if you remember our discussion, that it is primarily your service sector on which our economy is dependent. And service sector does not absorb a lot of labor from agriculture, because in service sector, and if you remember post-industrial economy, you need highly specialized skills that people do not have. Couple it with low education and literacy levels, low levels of awareness, which will ultimately lead to population growth. Now you are already poor, and because of low levels of education and awareness, you go on reproducing, you increase the population. Now this population growth can be a factor of poverty. Now with this, what happens is people would have no choice but to either stick to the same agriculture, low productive agriculture, or else move to urban areas. So these people will start migrating towards urban areas. And also, if you look at the limited industrial sector that we have, you find that it has rendered your rural artisans jobless because they cannot compete with factory made finer products. And ultimately, even these artisans would have to look for an alternate. And you find that apart from migration, there is no other option left. And if you remember, while looking at the satellite areas, we were saying that the data says, the older data says, it is around 30 to 31% of India which is urban. But now you find that more and more number of people are moving towards urban areas. So don't you think they'll ultimately contribute to urban poverty? Because even urban areas cannot absorb this unskilled labor. Urban areas do not have enough job opportunities for them. They do not have enough resources for them. And also, from this discussion, you get your answer about whether poverty is a factor of poverty is a consequence of economic development or not. Because yes, if you look at your spread of industrial areas, you'll find that yes, they will create jobs, but those jobs will be limited. Also, the spread of industries and service sectors will ultimately lead to conversion of agriculture land into commercial land. So these they already do not have enough land for agriculture. The size of land holdings is small. Now, where do these landless laborers go? They have to ultimately move towards urban areas. Now, with this basic understanding about the urban areas in India, now let's come and discuss about the questions. One idea is whether urban poverty in India is an overflow of rural poverty. Urban poverty as an overflow of rural poverty. To what extent can we say this? Now, one idea is how would urban poverty increase? Just think about this. How would the number of poor in urban areas increase? One is population growth in urban areas, and the other idea is migration from rural areas. Now, we know that it is not only migration which is contributing to urban poverty, it is population growth in urban areas as well. And it is not just limited to number of people moving from one area to other or number of poor people increasing. You find that even in urban areas, there can be other factors which contribute to urban poverty. Now, apart from these two, population growth and migration, can you suggest other factors which lead to urban poverty? Yes, it can be urban unemployment, great. It can be inflation, and let's keep that point here because a few of you might not be able to understand. Then what else? Population growth is done. High cost of living, great. Because in urban areas, obviously the cost of living is high. And because of this high cost of living, people would end up living in slum areas. And in slum areas, you find that there is problem with sanitation, there is problem with availability of other infrastructure, which will ultimately contribute to urban poverty. Yes, so seasonal employment and unstable employment, great. No skills to sustain in industries. A lot of pressure on the limited resources. So yes, great. You are getting points from your chapter on urbanization, then you are getting other points from your chapter on poverty. But what you have missed out on is, when we talk about poverty, we have looked into various factors, right? If you remember, there are policy level changes that are required. Then the poverty can be a consequence of socioeconomic factors. This poverty can be a factor of various psychological dimensions, right? So when you try to address this, one idea is that no, it is not only rural poverty or it is not only migration of rural poor to urban areas which contributes to urban poverty, but there are other factors as well. And what you do is you try to classify these factors into economic, political, social, psychological, and so on. So yes, if I look at the answers that have been provided by you collectively, it was great, because we covered pretty much every point. Someone has talked about the lack of government intervention, etc. But what you have to do is, because we need answers in totality, as individuals, we need total, complete answers. So what you have to do is, the best part is, first look at what can be the factors which can contribute to urban poverty, and figure out that migration from rural areas is one of the factors that contribute to urban poverty, and then approach this question. So I hope you are able to understand this. I hope you are able to understand this. Okay, so Ravi is saying that he's getting 7.5 out of 15 marks, which is a good score. Right, so 50% is a very good score. And to be very honest, if you look at evaluation within the institutions, we try to keep it a little hard. We so that you have, say, you not feel very comfortable. Right, so one idea is to make you comfortable with the subjects, with the preparation, and the other idea is to keep you a little uneasy, so that you try to put in more and more efforts. Okay, so the ones who are not able to, just what you have to do is, if you remember, what I was saying is that rather than writing yes, you do have to write new answers. But at least once or twice in a week, what you have to do is take up the questions which have already been answered by you, look at the evaluation, look at the comments, and try to figure out where is it that you can put in efforts to improve, and write that answer again. And then think about what the score is, because it will obviously improve. If you are able to accommodate those comments or those suggestions in your answer that you write again, it is going to help you. Okay, so this was the idea about urban poverty. And what I had basically done was, I had just picked up one factor. Remember the question on population growth and poverty. So we are saying that population growth is a factor of poverty and is a consequence of poverty as well. Similarly, I took up another factor, that is of migration from rural to urban areas, and then created this question. And yes, the approach was right to a great extent, but do one thing: when you revise today or tomorrow, just try to write the basic framework of the statement, that how you have to approach it, so that you remember in future as well. Because we have to stick to our, breaking it down into various dimensions, so that you do not miss on points. Okay, the other idea is poverty is also an outcome of economic development. So the first thing that you would have to understand is what all is considered to be economic development. That is the first idea. And then you have to see how poverty can be an outcome of it. How poverty can be an outcome of it. Can you think about various features of economic development? Can you think about various features of economic development? Dam is just an example of, yes, so the idea is infrastructure related growth. Great. Now this infrastructure can be meant for residential, industrial, or any other purpose. Then yes, economic development contributes directly to your gross domestic product. It will increase. Then this money will be invested in various social sector reforms. Now with the growth of, with economic development, another thing that goes on parallelly is rise in technology. Great. Growth of industrial sector, growth of service sector, right? Now, if you look at this, if you look at these factors, now what again you would have to do is that you have to look at various aspects of economic development, mention them. And now if you look at these factors, you'll find that there is a duality. There is a duality. So if we say that with increased GDP, there'll be a growth in public expenditure. There'll be a growth in expenditure by the state on various social sector aspects, like increase in investment in education, increase in investment in health, etc. Out of the same money or same revenue, the government will invest in infrastructure, etc. Now, if you think about this, one aspect is, yes, it is great. It is good because the government now has more resources to contribute to social sector. With new industries coming up, you have more number of jobs that are being created, right? So one way we think about economic development as something positive, because ultimately people will get benefited out of it. But now then you have to look at the negative side of it. So to create this infrastructure, so one idea is creation of infrastructure will bring in more companies, will make the standard of living of people better. But at the same time, you find that to create this infrastructure, government would have to acquire land. Where does this land come from? They would have to displace people. Similarly, we're saying that with increase in investment, with increase in number of industries, with increase in service sector, the overall standard of living is improving. Standard of living of people is improving. But with standard of living, what is increasing? Cost of living as well. Why? Because your rent will increase, basic transportation services will be required in the cities, and cost of each and every day commodity that is being used will increase, will go on increasing. And that increase in cost will ultimately contribute to levels of inflation. So if we are saying that with development, there is betterment in standard of living, there are more industries coming up, but these industries are not able to provide jobs for the poor. Why? Because they need skilled labor. And if you think about poor, that they do not have education, their levels of skills are low, etc. So they are not able to accommodate these people. Similarly, with increased cost of living, there'll be a certain section which will be able to provide that kind of money. But then there'll be others, there'll be poor who would not be able to. So it will contribute to economic development, will contribute to inflation. But generally we see that with inflation, you find that it is positive in the sense that it will ultimately lead to economic development because people will start investing more and more. There'll be new industries coming up with increase in demand. There'll be rise in consumerism. And I believe you are able to relate with the aspects that we have already discussed. But at the same time, there'll be a certain section of the society which will be left behind, which would not get jobs, which would not get any social security. Similarly, if you look at, yes, there'll be a great contribution to GDP, to gross domestic product. The government has more and more revenue now. But is it necessary that this GDP, this rise in GDP, will necessarily lead to increase in public expenditure on social sector? Is it necessary? And the answer is again no. Because if you look at numbers, we find that yes, it has been increasing a bit, but it is still not sufficient. And also the thing with economic development is there'll be rise in industries, there'll be rise in service sector. These private players will become stronger. These private players will then be able to negotiate with the government and ultimately dilute your labor laws, ultimately dilute the investment of government in social sector. And that is something that you see happening. And with that, you can say, yes, poverty can be considered to be an outcome of economic development. Poverty can be considered to be an outcome of economic development to that extent. So if you think about this statement, what you have to do is that you have to list in the factors of economic development, what all happens. If we say economic development, what does it mean? Then you start looking at these factors critically. And I would suggest that you try writing this answer. Try writing this answer. Consider the tail ender to be critically analyzed so that you can cover both the dimensions. So when you say critically analyze, what you would have to do, you would have to look at the positives of economic development. How? By creating jobs. How? By investing more in public expenditure or investing more in service sector. It ultimately curbs poverty. But at the same time, there is a certain section of the society which gets impacted in adverse manner. So yes, Abhishek, I'm not giving the entire answer. So Abhishek is talking about the impact on environment. And ultimately, if you remember, this adverse impact on environment will be detrimental to the health of the poor, because they'll be the ones who will end up living in that environment, because people who have the right means, they will migrate to other areas. So yes, so what you have to do is look at various aspects or features of economic development, try critically analyzing all those dimensions. So this was about these two considerations. Now let's look at, as we have already looked at a few questions, let's look at other questions that have been asked in the past. So I hope all the ideas about poverty are clear now, because what we have done is we have looked at how to measure poverty, the idea of multidimensional poverty, what are the problems with multidimensional poverty index, how India has been faring, etc. Then we looked into various causes and effects of poverty on the population, and we looked at the causes and consequences of poverty in the light of vicious cycle, that how it can be depicted as a vicious cycle. And then we saw a few other considerations related to poverty. Now let's look at this question that has been asked in the past. So it's saying that whether we have to provide solutions to the problem of poverty. So it is better you say that in conclusion, you do not have to, they have not asked for the solution, but we have to conclude on a positive note. So you can say that with economic development, there is increase in inequality. Wealth is concentrated in the hands of few. Then there are others who do not have anything, who do not get adequate share out of these resources. So what is the way out? The way out is to make our developmental policies more equitable, right? So you can, yes, you have to end it on a positive note, and you can do that. Yes, so inclusive economic development, right? So please try writing that answer. It is something that will actually help you cover all the dimensions related to poverty. The later part that we had, because otherwise we had looked at a question wherein the relationship was directly between population growth and poverty. Then there was a question in which there was a relationship between migration and poverty. Now this question will pretty much cover all the aspects. Okay, let's look at this question. Despite implementation of various programs for eradication of poverty by the government of India, poverty is still existing, and we have to explain by giving reasons. Despite implementation of various programs for eradication of poverty by the government of India, poverty is still there. So first idea is, try thinking of an introduction, then you come to the body part, and then you think about conclusion. So conclusion is simple, that we have to suggest measures, we can suggest measures to actually make these policies effective. We have to think of conclusion as making these policies effective. Now, this is a question where you get a lot of scope for introductions, right? This is a question where you get a lot of scope. Okay, so you have already started suggesting. Great. So yes, so one introduction can be about various government initiatives. What are these programs that government has started? So one idea can be that you just give a brief list of various programs meant for eradication of poverty, and I believe you remember from there. Then other idea is, you can think about using facts to portray that poverty has been on a decline. You have the facts. Where do you get the facts from? You can get the facts from MDPI, NMDPI, that how India has been faring well in the past. What can be other factors? What can be other forms of introduction? So yes, okay. Let's not talk about importance or significance of eradication of poverty, because that is not indicated in the question. That is not indicated in the question. So one idea is use various government initiatives to introduce your answer. Other idea is you can use various facts that portray a decline in the levels of poverty over the years, but it says that yes, poverty has been on a decline using these government programs, but ultimately you find that poverty has not ceased to exist. Poverty is still there. What can be the other idea? Okay, so now you are giving the examples from the similar thing that these are the various programs, etc. No, so we do not have to explain the intensity of poverty and the headcount here. We do not have to. That is not directly asked in the question. Now just think about it. Okay, let's slow down with the suggestions. Just think about it. So here they're saying that despite implementation of various programs for eradication of poverty, poverty is still existing, right? Now just remember from our discussion, can there be other ways to eradicate poverty? Apart from government intervention, can there be other ways to eradicate poverty? Just think about it. Yes, so what can be the various other ways to eradicate poverty? Yes, so the role of civil society, great. Increasing awareness of people, right? Developing rural areas. You have various other ways to eradicate poverty. If you remember from our discussion, we had looked at the problems and we were suggesting then and there itself in each and every dimension, right? So one of the dimension was political, that government can come up with various policies to eradicate poverty. Then there are other factors as well. So we can make people aware so that there is a dip in population growth. We can skill people, we can train people, etc. So those are mostly the initiatives of government for poverty eradication. Apart from that, there can be role of civil society. So other way can be to talk about other ways to eradicate poverty, so that you give them a glimpse that no, it is not only limited to say the implementation of various programs, or it is not just limited to government intervention, but there can be other ways to eradicate poverty as well. So there can be these three ways. Every way is equally good. So you do not have to worry that which way I start with. So you can use any of these ways. Now let's think about the body part. Now when think about the body part, it is primarily say targeting the implementation of government policies. That what are the lacunas in government policies because of which we are not able to say eradicate poverty completely from a country, right? So lacunas of the government policies, and particularly with regards to implementation. Now this is the question that you would have understood. We will come to this again, but this is the question that is more related to your paper 2, wherein we talk about the issues related to design and implementation of various government policies. Okay, so it can be directly a question from the framework that we are going to discuss ultimately in our last chapter, last discussion. And there you will understand that it is not just limited to implementation of government policies. There can be issues related to design of the policies as well. So therein you will get additional couple of points related to design as well. So the question puts the entire responsibility on implementation part, but yes, there can be flaws related to design of policy. So which can be just a statement that you can use. Now, apart from this, just think about this. Apart from this, can there be other factors? Can there be other factors which are responsible for the existence of poverty? So yes, lack of awareness among people, India's population growth, great. So corruption will fall under implementation, right? So now just think about this question. Think about this question. That one idea is that government has a lot of initiatives which are actually helping us to eradicate poverty, but poverty is still existing. Related to this, other idea is that there can be other ways to eradicate poverty as well. It is, we are not just completely relying on government initiatives. So one dimension which can be covered briefly in the introduction. Then you come to the body part. The body talks primarily about issues related to implementation. But apart from implementation of government policies, there can be issues related to design of policies as well. So we can use another statement in body part related to design of policies, that yes, that can be factor as well. Then there can be other factors which can help us eradicate poverty that you have already suggested. So the main part of the body goes to this. If you look at body, if you think of the entire question, say the body gets somewhere around 80%. Out of that 80%, implementation of government policy gets another 80% weightage. So most of the weightage in the body part is given to implementation of government policies. What are the problems related to implementation? Then another 10% goes to what can be the issues related to design of these policies. And another 10% can be contributed to what are the other factors or what are the other ways of eradicating poverty. So I hope you are getting this answer in totality. You are able to understand this. And then in conclusion, we can think about how can we make our policies effective to eradicate poverty. So yes, okay, so Parvag, we will discuss this design part, and you are right when you say inaccurate estimation of targeted population. We will discuss this. Corruption is also a factor, and I'll come to that. And I'm going to ask your suggestions related to problems related to implementation of government policies. Femina, you'll understand the role of civil society in eradication of poverty when we discuss civil society. No. So, Parthi, when we say come up with a critical analysis of something, right? Because they have asked this question, so it would not be a problem. If you write about the problems related to implementation, it is not a problem because you are writing in a constructive way and then suggesting how we can make it better. How can we make it better? Right? So it is not going to be a problem. So yes, you can use examples of failed policies, etc. Right? So just look at this. So what you have to do is, introduction is done. In the body part, you can think about various other factors like population growth, inadequate access to resources, etc. that can be covered, right? That can be mentioned. Then you can think about issues related to design and implementation of various poverty alleviation schemes. And then under implementation, you have various problems. So you are suggesting corruption. You are suggesting lack of transparency. You are suggesting inadequate resources. You are suggesting flaws related to design, right? So all these pointers have been mentioned here. So for now, yes, you have a basic general understanding about problems related to implementation. But by the time we discuss our issues related to design and implementation of various policies, you will have a complete idea about how you have to approach this. For now, you have this. Try writing this answer. And when we discuss the last chapter, we'll break down everything and you'll get a clear picture of how to approach this implementation part. So please suggest if everything is okay. Please suggest if everything is okay. So just try writing this answer. Try to break this question down. And maybe while writing, you end up coming up with even better introduction. Maybe you come up with an introduction which covers all these aspects. Right. So rather than sticking to one aspect, you might get a good idea of integrating all these factors in that say limited scope of 3 to 4 lines. So try writing this answer. In the body part, yes, you will face a little challenge when it comes to implementation of government policies, because right now you would have to think about it. Right now you would have to think, and your thoughts would not be structured. That how corruption, say corruption is very simple. That yes, then what about other parts of implementation? Because there are various parts to implementation. Implementation of a government policy or program is in itself a process, and which we will break down and discuss again. So please try writing this, and we have given, so the content that you might have till now will be sufficient to get you 50% marks. That would not be a problem. If you're not able to, just go through this. Okay, these are primarily issues related to implementation. Now, whatever problems you face in implementation, try to fix them in conclusion as suggestions how we can make our policy effective. So fix issues related to design, fix issues related to implementation. So in implementation, if we say there is no transparency, the central government is not providing resources in time, the central government is not caring about the local needs of the people. They just come up with schemes that are imposed on various districts. So whatever problems you encounter, you try to provide a solution in the conclusion part. Okay, let's look at another question. An essential condition to eradicate poverty is to liberate the poor from the process of deprivation. Substantiate this statement with suitable examples. An essential condition to eradicate poverty is to liberate the poor from this process of deprivation. So you have two questions now. One is, what is this process of deprivation? And the other question is, apart from this essential condition, what can be the other conditions? What can be the other conditions to eradicate poverty? So we have to stick to our body part, wherein we would have to talk about how we can eradicate poverty by liberating the poor from this process of deprivation. So we have to first understand this process of deprivation. So your introduction can be, what can be the other conditions to liberate the poor? Similarly, you can come up with say some kind of suggestion in the conclusion part. But now think about this process of deprivation. So what is deprivation? If you remember, we were saying that they're deprived in each and every factor, in each and every dimension. So they're deprived of the political power, they're deprived of the economic power, right? They're deprived of various social services. That is what deprivation of the poor is. Now, what is this process of deprivation? Can anyone suggest what is this process of deprivation? So deprivation we understand. If we think in terms of relative poverty, we see that they are deprived in each and every factor. There is, yes, inequality. But what is this process of deprivation? Perfect, Anurag, you are thinking in the right direction. Anyone else? Yes, so it is basically your vicious cycle. It is basically your vicious cycle of poverty, from where you have to write this answer. That is the process of deprivation. Now, in this deprivation, you would have to look at the role of society, you would have to look at the role of your government or various policies, and you just think about it, right? This is more, this question is more, say, more about how you understand this process of deprivation. Because generally students end up writing about deprivation, that they are deprived when it comes to educational opportunities. But this question is specifically talking about the process of deprivation. So if you think of process of deprivation, you can simply think of your vicious cycle. So you do not have to mention the vicious cycle here. You have to think of the vicious cycle and write the answer here. You do not have to mention vicious cycle, right? And I hope, because this is something that we have already discussed. This is something that we have discussed in greater detail. We have looked at various factors of deprivation. So what you have to do is just break it down in various components and see that how it becomes a process of deprivation. This is also a good question. Please try writing this, and see, I go on saying that keep writing these answers. Now you do not have to write everything all at once. So you still have time. Once the classes are over, you can still take up a few other questions from previous year, a few from our practice sets, and then try writing those answers. But for now, at least try writing one answer a day. So you get multiple options to write answers, but at least try writing one answer a day. So with this, we conclude our discussion on poverty and we move towards hunger. And if you see that when I said that poverty is mentioned in both paper 1 and 2, and if you look at the questions, there are questions which were limited to paper 1, like population growth and poverty. Then there are questions which are limited to paper 2, wherein we think of government intervention, what are the problems related to government intervention. So these are primarily the kind of questions that they have asked, and I have also suggested what kind of other questions or other dimensions they can ask questions from. Okay, now a related idea is that of hunger. So when we think of poverty, if you remember the various images that we see, that we have seen, we'll find that if you think of features of poverty, we say that hunger is one of the features. Hunger, we will come to the idea what is hunger, what is malnutrition, etc. But generally we think and we understand of poverty and hunger as they go hand in hand. But can anyone, before we look into the divergence in poverty and hunger, can anyone suggest a factor, or can anyone suggest something which indicates that hunger and poverty need not necessarily go hand in hand? Can anyone give that kind of factor? So Vaishna, you are thinking in right direction. Great. Yes. So see, with hunger, there are related aspects of nutrition, malnutrition, of food insecurity, etc. And you find that it is not only poverty which will contribute to hunger. When it comes to hunger, when it comes to problems of malnutrition, etc., there are other factors as well. It can be your lifestyle, the food you eat, the kind of, say, information you consume, because ultimately that can also, because if it leads to a mental health issue, that will also affect the levels of nutrition. So we will come to all that. The only idea is you just understand that it is not necessary that poverty and hunger go hand in hand. And also they have asked a question in the previous year wherein they talk about the divergence between poverty and hunger, and you'll understand the divergence. Now, when we were looking at various indicators of poverty, and particularly multidimensional poverty index, we were saying that we are doing good. We are doing better every year. Right, so there has been a decline in multidimensional poverty in India. But when you look at hunger, and this is from your global hunger index that will be discussed in detail, do not worry about it. If you look at this global hunger index, you'll find that the scale says starting from 0 to 50, the levels of hunger are increasing. Right, so towards 50, it is becoming extremely alarming. India right now is here. But if you look at the situation of India, for years, it was on a decline. Right. It was declining. But now with the current numbers, you find that it has increased. From 28.2, it has become 29.1. And at the same time, we say that there has been a dip in levels of poverty. There has been a dip in levels of poverty, but at the same time, we see that there has been a rise in the problem of hunger and the issues related to hunger, which shows a divergence between poverty and hunger. That it is not only poverty, or poverty is not the only factor of hunger. There can be other factors as well. And then with this, you would have to understand the basic concepts of nutrition. What we'll do is, I will suggest a few questions and we'll try discussing those questions so you understand nutrition in totality. Now also, you look at this data from your NFHS 4 and 5. So we are coming to hunger. You just look at a few things so that you understand it does not go hand in hand with poverty. So if you look at the data, you find that yes, over the years, there has been a decrease. there has been a decrease in these indicators. So the three indicators that I use here are meant for children. One is stunting, wasting, and underweight. Stunting basically is having short height for your age, because this is how you find malnutrition in children. That if you look at children, it can come from your practical experience. If you look at children, you'll find that a few are healthy, then there'll be a few who are malnourished. They can be shorter, they can be very lean, very thin, then also they can be very obese, right? They can be very fat. So these three indicators are primarily used to indicate malnutrition in children. One is stunting, which means having short height for age. Then there is wasting, which means having low weight compared to your height. So the height has gone normally. The height has been increasing according to the average increase in height that should happen with age, but the weight is not increasing. So you'll find very thin and tall kids. What does that indicate? Wasting. Similarly, there is underweight. That means basically having low weight according to age. So the height here is immaterial when you think about underweight. So according to age, if you find that there is a prescribed weight that a child should have, but they're not able to meet that requirement. So this is how generally you find the manifestation of malnutrition in children. Now look at these indicators. So I could not find a graph for NFHS 5 data that I've mentioned here, and you see that there has been a decrease. But if you look at wasting, you find from the levels of wasting in 2005-6 was 19.8. But if you look at this here in 2015-16, you find that there has been an increase in the incidences of wasting. But yes, again, if you look at NFHS 5 data 2021 or 2019 to 21, you find that there has again been decrease. So this is basically to give you a fair idea. This is basically to give you a fair idea that yes, there is divergence, because at the same time we are seeing that the GDP has increased, right? The GDP has increased. The investment of government in social sector has increased. Per capita incomes have increased. The levels of poverty are going down. But the problem of hunger remains the same. Just look at these numbers. So you still have 35.5% of children below the age of 5 years who are stunted, who do not get the perfect height for their age. Similarly, you have 19% of the children who are wasted. Similarly, 32% of the children who are underweight. So this is something which is problematic. And if you remember that related to children, we were saying that infant mortality rates are still very high. In India, the infant mortality rates are still very high. And if you look at infant mortality rate, most of the cases of mortality in children are actually coming out of problem of malnutrition, that they do not get sufficient nutrition, which ultimately leads to their death in a very young age. So this directly contributes to infant mortality rate. Now, when we look at the chapter on hunger, we'll first try to understand what is hunger. Is hunger a problem? Because a few of you might already be hungry, right? So there are a few of you who will always start talking about break. When is the break, right? So you get hungry. Is it a problem? Not so much so. Then there can be problem related to malnutrition. Then there can be problem related to starvation. So when we think about hunger, we have to think in terms of nutrition as well. Nutrition is an important factor that contributes to the levels of malnutrition. It contributes to poverty, etc. That we will come to. Ultimately, we will discuss everything. But again, it will be more biased towards nutrition. So here you will basically you can easily cover one of the vulnerable sections. So children and health can be easily covered here, right? Because most of the indicators that we are going to look into, even related to your global hunger index, will find that most of the indicators are related to children. So what can be the solutions, etc. Also, this is going to be an important factor which will help you in understanding the next chapter, which is on health. So when we look at hunger related to nutrition and food security, which will ultimately help you understand health better, because it is going to be one of the important factors related to health. So Femina is asking, what is then the difference between dwarfs and stunting? Now, dwarfism is something that happens naturally. It is a condition. And if you think about stunting, the primary reason of stunting is nutrition, right? So it is not biological that one who's not having sufficient height for their age, it is not necessarily biological. It can be because of malnutrition as well. So when we think of stunting, it is related to malnutrition. And when we think of dwarfism, it is a biological condition. Now try thinking about hunger. So if you're feeling hungry, does that mean ultimately you'll be malnourished, or is it going to be a problem? Not necessarily. If you remember the idea of Amartya Sen, if you remember the capability approach that we had discussed, we were saying that there can be people who are fasting. There can be people who are fasting, which is out of their choice. Related here. Now, you might be hungry, but that does not mean that you do not have adequate nutrition. It is just an uneasy feeling that you right now you need to consume something. That is the basic feeling of hunger. Now think of malnutrition. In malnutrition, again, it is not by choice. There is a component of choice that we will come to, but otherwise you understand malnutrition, it is not primarily by choice, because you do not have sufficient to eat. So if you sustain this hunger for a longer time, your body would not get sufficient nutritions because of which there'll be a deficiency in nutrition in your body. There'll be a deficiency of nutrition in your body. And now if you sustain this malnutrition for a longer time, that you do not get food for a day or two or more, it ultimately leads to starvation. That there is an acute deficiency or severe deficiency of various nutrients in your body. Forget about nutrients, you do not even get sufficient calories to cover your daily requirements. And if you remember poverty, initially we thought of poverty line in terms of nutritional requirements, right? It was 2100 and 2400 kilocalories. So if you're not able to get sufficient calories, the problem of starvation starts. Then it can lead to deficiency in vitamins, etc. So we will make it simple. We will make it more understandable for you. But when we think of the problem of hunger, or what our subject matter is going to be, it is not hunger, because it is simply the feeling, the uneasy feeling that you get when you get hungry, that your body wants something, right? And this hunger can be induced because of psychological reasons as well. This hunger because you find that even if you have had enough for the day, there'll be a certain time the clock will strike 8 and you'll think, no, it's time for dinner. You might have covered your nutritional or your calorie intake for the day, but it can be, yes, psychological as well. Your body will go on signaling, which is not a problem. Our problem is going to be the deficiency of nutrition in body, and which, if sustained for a long time, can lead to starvation, because ultimately in starvation you can lose your organs as well. It is not just simple deficiency, but ultimately it can lead to any other disease, malfunctioning of various organs, and death as well. Now this is just to give you an idea about what is the state of malnutrition globally. So there are close to 1 billion people globally, according to FAO, who are affected by starvation, who do not get enough to eat, who do not have sufficient calorie intake for the day, which roughly translates to 1 in 6 people. So when we say, and if you think about this, Food and Agricultural Organization, so if you think about it, we generally say that no, because our priorities, the priorities of the government, the priorities of the civil society are slightly different. And we feel that living in the cities or living in the silos, we find that no, it should not be a problem. Food should not be a problem because government is providing free of cost grains. Government is providing subsidized food. But how can this be a problem? And by the time we finish this chapter, you will understand that this is a serious problem. Looking at the numbers, you find if 35% of the children are stunted, which is a big problem, because yes, there can be other factors that lead to the stunting or wasting, underweight, etc. But one of the primary factors is malnutrition, that people are not getting sufficient to eat. And if you now think of malnutrition, it generally manifests in two ways. One can be undernutrition and the other one can be overnutrition. What is undernutrition? You're not getting sufficient calorie intake. Because you do not have sufficient calorie intake, you do not get enough nutrition for the body. Because getting calories is one thing, quality of those calories. Now, a few of you might be gym freaks, right? And they understand this very well, that it is not just about calories. It is not just about eating anything. It is more about nutrition. What nutrition do you derive out of it? So it should have all the essential vitamins, minerals. It should have protein, fats, etc. in the right amount. That is what nutrition is. That is the idea of your balanced diet. Right. So it is not just related to protein and carbs. It is not just limited to protein, carbs, and good fats, but it extends to your various vitamins and minerals as well. So if you think about this, one form of malnutrition wherein your body is not getting sufficient nutrition can be because of undernutrition, can be because of not getting enough calorie intake. And the other idea is overnutrition. So overnutrition is something that most of you will be able to relate to, that just because we are eating this fast food, processed food, which does not have any nutrients, it is not nutritious, it is just empty calories. So yes, you are consuming sufficient calories, and maybe more than sufficient, more than your requirement, but you are not getting enough nutrition out of it. So that is the idea of overnutrition. Then related to the idea of malnutrition is the deficiency of vitamins in the body. And this is something you find becoming very popular, very common now, that people have micronutrient deficiency in their bodies. Yes, they are having enough macronutrients, they're having enough proteins and carbs, etc., but there is no diversity on their plate. They're not consuming these nutrients or consuming these macronutrients from diverse sources. And if you think about this, you think about the push of government towards millets. So traditionally in India, people have been eating a lot of millets. So if you are from north, the common millets that are used are bajra, etc. Then if you are from the south, then generally it will be more about ragi, your foxtail millet, etc. So there has been a history of consumption of millets in India. But over the years, we shifted more towards other grains, rice, wheat, etc. But now government is pushing again towards millets. Why? Because they have these essential micronutrients, right? So this push towards millet is to bring diversity on your plate so that you do not suffer from problems like micronutrient deficiency. So this is the idea of malnutrition. Now we are saying that this malnutrition can happen because you are not having enough calories. It can happen because you are not having enough nutrition, right? So what you have to do is you have to think about what can be the various causes. Because if you look at it from a broader perspective, you only have two reasons: that people are not able to eat, say, not able to consume sufficient calories, or people are not taking nutritious food. That is what will lead to malnutrition. But now you have to break down these factors to figure out what can be the solution. So if your calorie requirement is not getting covered, it can be a problem with availability of food or not. Because food is not available. Then it can be about affordability of food, that this nutritious food is not affordable. Now this availability can be broken down into various factors. Can now someone suggest, as I have already given you idea, that it can be because sufficient food is not available. But what can be the factors? because of which this sufficient food might not be available. Yes, so it can be a direct factor of agriculture. Any issues related to agriculture, drought, floods, less agricultural productivity can be a direct factor of availability of food crops. Similarly, if we talk about availability for your weaker sections, the problem can be related to your public distribution system. Problem can be related to food security, that the government is not able to provide people with subsidized food or free food. Then the problem can be related to affordability, that because of the inflationary trend, people might not be able to purchase nutritious food. Now you think about it, that if you think about nutritious food, over the years the prices have gone so high that for the poorer sections it has become next to impossible to get nutritious food on their plate in their kitchens. Look at the prices of pulses, look at the prices of essential fats, look at the prices of any kind of fruits and vegetables, and you find that it is primarily because of unaffordability that the issue persists. Because if we think about the problem related to availability, it is not much of a problem, because most of the grains are rotting in our food corporation silos, right? In those storage houses, most of the things are rotting. So when you think of malnutrition, the idea is, do not just limit it to the individual, that they are not able to have sufficient calories or nutrition. There can be other factors as well, and these factors can be broken down into various aspects. So if you think of agriculture, low agricultural productivity. If you think of agriculture, delayed monsoon. Think of agriculture, overuse of pesticides and fertilizers, right? And if you look at the questions, they can be asked on any dimension. So if you remember population growth, what were we doing? We were splitting those factors. We took the major factors and we were splitting all those factors. Similarly, we have to make the same treatment to this topic as well, right? So there can be supply side, demand side factors, etc. Now look at various causes of malnutrition. By this time you would have understood that it can be because of calorie deficiency, that you are not able to consume sufficient calories. Then it can be micronutrient deficiency, which is also called hidden hunger, wherein you are having sufficient calories but you are not getting nutrition out of those calories. So one is not having enough. Second part is that the body is not able to absorb this nutrition. If you are sick, your body would not be able to absorb nutrition. If you do not get clean drinking water, which will affect your gut health, you would not be able to absorb nutrition out of this. So the other factors related to sanitation, availability of safe drinking water, low levels of immunization can also become factors of malnutrition. Now, one of the idea here is that food security or availability and affordability of food is something important. Availability and affordability of food is something important which has to be looked into, and we will come to that. Before that, just look, this is something which will make it easy for you to understand the idea of overnutrition and the idea of undernutrition, and how it can lead to various problems in children and adults. So if you're not getting enough quantity of food, if you're not getting quality food, if you're not getting a stable supply of quality food, all these things can lead ultimately to problems like child wasting, etc., underweight in children, stunting in children. Then it can also impact your adult population. You can just go through this graph, right? You can just go through this image. This is just to understand. Now, just if you look at other factors here, one is you're not able to consume enough. You do not get sufficient calorie intake. Now, one direct factor can be that it is not available. You do not have access to food. But there can be other factors related to your mental health. If you're not mentally stable, and if you think about this, the day you are stressed, The day before your prelims examination, you'll be so stressed. Either you'll go on eating, right? So you'll either engage in overeating, or else you would not feel like eating at all. You'll think that my appetite is gone. I do not want to eat anything. So with the levels of stress, then apart from stress, apart from anxiety, other factors can be your socioeconomic condition. Think about the disparity within the family. Think about any other problem, any other socioeconomic problem, which can also lead to malnutrition. So it is not just limited to the direct intake of food, it can be based on various other factors. Now, one of the important factors of, say, of say getting rid of malnutrition, or one of the most important idea can be your food security, which we'll come to. This is these are basic definitions that you can look into. So we're talking about stunting, wasting, and underweight. In technical terms, they are called chronic, acute, and general malnourishment. This is something you just remember, because this is directly related to your global hunger index. So it is better you remember, because a question can be asked in prelims as well, and has been a similar question has been asked, right? So just try to remember this. You would have to, I don't know how, because till stunting, wasting, and underweight it is easy to understand, but how do you relate it to chronic, acute, and general? It is something that you would have to do on your own. Now think about food insecurity, and along with food insecurity, just think about nutrition insecurity, because generally we think about unavailability of food. We also have to now think about unavailability of nutritious food, and with this you see that the direction in which your government policies are moving is now more towards nutrition security, is more towards say taking care of nutritional requirements of people rather than just food or calorie intake requirements. So there has been a shift in policy as well, with a push towards millets, etc. Now think about this. If people do not have access to adequate amounts of food, that is what food insecurity is. But now if you think about people not having adequate access to nutritious food, that is what nutrition insecurity is. Now, what can be the reasons behind this food insecurity? What can be the reasons behind this food insecurity? Now, if you look at it in various levels, it can be mild to severe, wherein there is, say, if you have availability of food, but you do not know whether you will be able to get that food tomorrow or not. Say you are a daily wage laborer, you have no guarantee whether you will get food tomorrow or not. Similarly, if you have to compromise on the quantity of food that you are not, you have to say you have basic requirement for your body is 4 chapatis, but you have to limit it to 2 or 3 chapatis. Why? So that you have enough resources for the next day. Then it can be about reducing the quality of food or compromising on the quality of food. So it may be limited to a few vegetables which are cheaper. For example, potato, which is generally cheaper compared to any other nutritious vegetable. Then it can be limited to a mix of not having any vegetable at all, not having any fruits at all, so compromising on the quality. Then it can also be about skipping meals, right? Because there are levels. You have to understand there are levels. So food insecurity, it is not the only idea is not being able to have food. It starts from if you do not have, say, stability. When it comes to nutritional requirement, you do not have stability. You have food today, but you do not know whether you will have it tomorrow or not. Similarly, you have to compromise on the quality of food, that you are not having, say, enough nutrients. Why? Because you cannot afford it. Then the third idea can be reducing the quantity of food, having 2 chapatis rather than 4. Then it can be about going without food for days. So there can be levels when it comes to food insecurity. Now just think about what can be the various reasons of this food insecurity. Now, I would suggest, rather than writing it like inflation, gender discrimination, etc., first try to split it in various dimensions. First try to split it in various dimensions so that you can target those. What can be the basic dimensions? What can be the basic dimensions? So one, primary will be related to agriculture, because if you do not have sufficient produce, you will not be able to provide people with food. That is the first dimension. Now, this agriculture is dependent on various factors that we will discuss. The second dimension can be your socio-economic factors, can be your social factors. What kind of social factors? Can you think of any social factors which will affect food security? Yeah, so economic factors, social factors, then the factors can be political as well. Let's think about social factors first. So yes, gender discrimination, that the women of the house or the female members of the house have to compromise on food. Then it can be related to any caste-based, religion-based discrimination with people. Then it can be, yes, related to your class, that which section of the society are you coming from. Yes, there can be other factors like superstition. There can be other factors like think about not having eggs, right? So if you think about egg, it is something that is considered nutritious, and most of the doctors, any kind of nutrition expert, will go on, say, vouching for eggs, that provide eggs particularly to children, but because of various socio-cultural reasons, not having eggs for that matter. Then yes, there can be economic factors like inflation. There can be economic factors like fiscal deficit of the government, if you remember from poverty. So yes, ignorance at the policy level, etc. Okay, so you understand these factors very well. Let's look at these one by one. So one idea is that will affect food security is agriculture. If the agriculture is not sustainable, if the agricultural productivity is low, you'll find you would not have enough to provide for everyone. And if you remember the situation of India before Green Revolution, it was food insecurity, or it was non-availability of food which became a problem. And then hence the push towards Green Revolution. But now we find that food security at the government level, at the level of the state, is not a problem. We have sufficient say food available for our population. Now there can be various other factors related to agriculture which will decrease the productivity, which will decrease the amount of produce. These factors can be erosion, these factors can be related to disasters, not having regular monsoon because of climate change, etc. Not having say the availability of irrigation infrastructure, not being able to purchase good quality seeds, not being able to use any kind of manure for your crops, etc., which will directly impact agriculture. So need not go through see every detail of agriculture. You can understand one factor is agriculture on which food security is dependent. Then there are various other socio-cultural factors. So one is the gender inequality that persists. Then the problem related to the amount of resources you have, problem related to poverty, then related to your lifestyle. That someone was suggesting that the moment he or she crosses dominoes, it becomes irresistible for them to not have or to not stop by and have it. So issues related to your lifestyle, that we have a very sedentary lifestyle. The food choices that we make are very poor, which are ultimately detrimental to our health. Similarly, if there is the family size is large, that the household would not be able to provide everyone with the resources, and ultimately you'll find that your gender insecurity or gender inequality, etc., is based in this large family size and the unavailability of resources. The not being able to have clean water, not being able to maintain sanitation, because this will ultimately would not or stop your body from absorbing the nutrition that you're having. Then uneven distribution of agricultural resources, What is that? That there are people who are landless laborers, there are people who have very small land size or land holdings. Now, on that very small land holding, it is not possible to have, say, productive agriculture, right? And if you remember, we were talking about what can ultimately lead to, say, lead to the formation of the joint family, right? What can lead to formation of a joint family? So a family which gets nuclearized because of various factors can become joint again on the basis of land holding, because the size of the land holding is very low and they cannot possibly conduct agriculture or produce enough from those small land holdings. So they will pool their land resources and go for agriculture. Then superstition, various socio-cultural practices, etc. can be the reasons. Similarly, there can be various political reasons that the government is not investing sufficient in, say, taking care of the nutritional requirements. Issues related to your public distribution system, right? There can be leakages. There can be problem related to storage. There can be problem related to identifying people, that who are the people who actually need this support. Then your wars, any kind of dictatorial regime, that if there is a dictatorial regime, they would not care so much about the population. They would not care so much about the citizens. They would end up investing most of their resources in other things. Rather than taking care of the priorities or the needs of the people, they will invest it elsewhere. And you cannot ultimately question the government that why is there no food on our plate? Why do you find 30-35% of our population or 30-35% of our children who are undernourished, and you're still going on investing in something else? You're still investing in other things which are not even there on the priority list, right? So this can happen in a dictatorial regime. Then you think about problems related to implementation and design of various policies, and which will be covered again, which will be covered. I'll give you a fair idea related to our public distribution system towards the end. Then you think about now the global hunger index, the data that we had seen, and before which, what I would want is, we have looked at these factors related to food security. Now, before we move ahead, think about nutrition insecurity. Think about nutrition insecurity and what can be the factors that lead to nutrition insecurity. Now, one thing, the factors that affect food security will also affect nutrition insecurity. So please do not repeat the factors. What I would want is that what are the other factors? Yes, there is, the food is available, but whether the food is nutritious or not can be questioned. So pick up factors which are not common between food and nutrition insecurity. So Femina is suggesting that because of Russia-Ukraine war, there has been a problem related to wheat import. Yes. No, do not. Okay, yes. So your food choices, great. It was mentioned there, but now you think about it. We will come to it. Affordability, all those things have been covered. Yes. Awareness, great. Okay, so I have also added a question that I'll show you. Okay, just think about this. Yes, so few of you have suggested things, but most of you are repeating the same points from there, right? So now just think about it. So what is the difference between food and nutrition insecurity? Just think about this idea. So when you think about food security, we're talking about making food available for everyone. Making food available for everyone. But when you think about nutrition security, we think of making nutritious food available for everyone. So one problem can be related to not producing, right? So these are the same point, but you have to put them in a different way. So not producing sufficient or not producing diverse, not providing diverse food choices because you're not producing different crops. Then other idea can be people are not aware about nutritious food choices. Then it can be related to your lifestyle. The modern lifestyle that we live is ultimately one of the most important reason that you find that becomes a problem related to our health. Okay, so this is something that I will address at the end, but you keep this in mind. Yes, the points that you have suggested, that the nutritious food is expensive, people are not aware what is nutritious, what is not, then you do not have a lot of diversity on the plate because people are not aware, because we are not producing diverse crops, which can become a problem to nutrition insecurity. With this, I would want you to understand that if a question is asked, please be aware what they have asked. And the chances are, even if they have written food insecurity, they would mean nutrition insecurity, because there has been a shift in the vision of the government, there has been a shift in the direction of our policies. So even if they write food insecurity, think of it as nutrition insecurity. Because when you think of malnutrition, think of it in terms of deficiency of nutrients, right? Not having sufficient nutrients for your body. This is what you have to think about, because now it is the idea of food security, or the idea of making food grains available to the people is very old, because it has become ineffective, right? So please think of nutrition security rather than food security. So yes, newer practices, modern practices like excessive use of fertilizers, etc., they ultimately lead to say a deficiency of nutritious content in the crops, production of low quality of food grains, etc. Okay, so please understand this as nutrition insecurity. Moving ahead, think of global hunger index. Now you know that yes, it talks about global hunger, but ultimately the idea is about malnutrition. The idea is about problems related to malnutrition and taking care of that, right? So it is not just the hunger that the general feeling of hunger that we get. Now this global hunger index is an annual report published in the month of October every year, and you see that every year they'll publish it in October. Every year the Indian government will come up with the same argument, saying that there are problems related to this global hunger index. And this is a report. Yes, it was not there for 1 year, but you find that it is not perfect. No report can be perfect, right? Because ultimately they rely on sample survey data. There are problems related to this that will come to, but you understand this, that we cannot just say that this is problematic and it's either you have to change the methodology or we are not accepting this. Why? Because if we can accept the multidimensional poverty index, which is also based on sample survey report, why not this, right? So they are based on the data that is going into this, making this global hunger index or into a multidimensional poverty index, are coming from the same source. So why at one place we accept that, we're saying that we have done wonderfully well, at the same time reject this global hunger index? That we will come to. So it was first published in 2006, published every October, jointly published by Concern Worldwide and Welthungerhilfe. Then the thing is, if you look at India's rank, it has not been consistent. So please do remember that there'll be a change in the number of countries, which will also impact the rank. Irrespective of that, you find that we have not been faring very well. So we are generally towards the last 10-15 countries when it comes to global hunger index, that we are not faring well. So the first question is, at the same time when we say that there has been a decline in poverty, at the same time when we say that there has been a rise in per capita income, At the same time, we say that there has been a rise in the GDP, but why do we find that we are struggling related when it comes to malnutrition and hunger in a country? So there is definitely a problem related to our developmental strategy, isn't it? There has to be a problem with our developmental strategy, that in few indicators we are faring well, but when it comes to something as crucial as nutrition, we are lagging behind. And keep this question in mind, we'll try to answer this by the end of the lecture. If you look at the rank of India, as already suggested, that, or if the level of hunger, we see that there has been a rise in the level of hunger in a country compared to the previous year. And this is the same timeline in which we were saying that India has improved in terms of poverty, in eliminating poverty. See, Mithun, how it is related, how per capita income is related to hunger. Just think about this. One of the important indicators of economic development is per capita income. That on an average, the per capita income of people is increasing. Now, this per capita income is increasing, but it is limited to a certain section. There are other sections of the population, or you think of this in terms of widening gap between the rich and the poor. So the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. This is what it indicates, right? Because traditionally, increase in per capita income has been directly related to development, economic development of a country. But now we see that with changing dimensions of development, with change in understanding of development, with newer indicators being added to our list of etc., we find that it has become redundant, and that is where we say that there is a gap or there is a problem with respect to our developmental strategy. Now, if you look at this global hunger index, you'll find 4 indicators here. One is undernourishment in general public. It covers both adults and children. Then child stunting, child wasting, which have already been suggested that what is it. So child stunting, child wasting, and then child mortality. These are the 4 indicators on the basis of which your GHI score or global hunger index score is calculated. Now, just think about this. Now, just look at this. If you're saying, because we have to figure out what can be the problems, right? Before we look at what government says, what is the government's stand on this, let's look at the problems ourselves. So first idea is, yes, these indicators are related to nutrition. These indicators are related to hunger, because one of the most important factor of child mortality is what? Malnutrition. Similarly, child stunting and child wasting are directly dependent on malnutrition. Then if you think of undernourishment, it is also dependent on availability of and quality of food. Now just look at this, look at these indicators. Do you think there is any problem with these indicators? Yes, so Vaishna has highlighted, look at these factors, look at child stunting, child mortality, child wasting. 3 out of 4 factors are related to children. So if we are talking about global hunger index, we are saying that it is portraying the level of hunger or malnutrition in the entire population. But if you look at the factors, 3 out of 4 factors are related to children. What can be the other factors? What can be the other problems? This is fine. What can be the other problems? Others, can you think about it? So one idea is, you can always question the data. You can always question the data that is being used, which is ultimately sample survey data. So if it is sample survey data, it would not give you a clear picture of what is happening. So yes, accuracy of your data. Share. Why not understand, Shraddha, what do you mean when you say share? So Ravi, I'll tell others as well. So that is something that will come up as a counter argument. The one that you have suggested is a counter argument to this problem. Let's try to highlight the problems first, and then we'll come to the counter arguments. So yes, weightage that is being assigned to all these indicators can be questioned. See, Kamna, you're saying that the average height, weight, etc., they vary from country to country, but ultimately this is coming from the national data. So it is basically coming from the data of our own country. Yes. So how about maternal mortality? Okay, so that has already been questioned, that because most of the things are related to children. Just think about this. Is child mortality or is malnourishment the only factor of child mortality? Is malnourishment the only factor of child mortality? No, absolutely yes. It is not. So when you say child mortality, if you look at child mortality, children can die because of other reasons as well. Yes, one of the major reasons is considered to be malnutrition, but what about other factors? Then think of other things. Is there any other thing that is coming to your mind? Yes, so hygiene, sanitation, etc. are other factors which lead to child mortality. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so it does not capture the say issues related to gender disparity in a country. Yes. Okay. So if you look at these indicators, because there is something related to undernourishment that you want to understand. So one idea is that 3 out of 4 factors are related to children. Second is that the indicators, the weightage of the indicators can be questioned. Third is the data set itself can be questioned, that it is coming from sample survey. Then the fourth point is that if you look at child mortality, it is not the only factor, the only malnutrition is not the only factor of child mortality. It can be other factors as well. And when it comes to undernutrition, you'll find that the survey that they have done for undernourishment of population, it is based on an opinion poll, and the sample size of that poll is 3,000. Think about the population of a country and look at the sample size, that is of 3,000 people. And this opinion poll consisted of questions like, did you feel that you would not get food? Or do you feel any insecurity related to food in the past or this week or today, etc.? So these are the kind of questions that are asked. It is basically an opinion poll, because think about it. You might have all the resources, but you might feel that this is not enough, which is basic human tendency, right? And also the sample size is very low. So yes, Abhishek, we can question the data. First, what we are trying to do is we are concluding the arguments of the government against this global hunger index. Other thing is we can come up with suggestions. What could have been made better in this global hunger index, right? So that we will come to. Now look at the counter arguments. So why children? Why 3 indicators related to children? As Ravi has suggested, and that is what the answer is, that if you think about the health of children, children bear the most priority in families, right? If you remember, joint family centered around children. If you think of your nuclear family centered around children, ultimately it is for the children that that parents toil, that parents put in efforts, and ultimately children are the one who get the most share out of anything within that household. Yes, there can be exceptions, but it is mostly children which or the health and education levels of children that is a good indicator of family resources, because it is mostly children who get the maximum share out of whatever is there within that household. Then now you think about what could have been better. So you see that these issues like child mortality, wasting, stunting, etc. can be because of various other factors. It can be because of say your lifestyle choices, right? It can be because of awareness levels of parents, that the parents themselves are not aware. It can be something that is there in your genes. It can be genetic for that matter. So we do not consider those factors. Now just think about suggestions. Just think about the suggestions related to this global hunger index. So it could have been more comprehensive. It could have given due weightage to your adult and elderly population. It could have tried to capture the intrafamilial or within the family, the kind of disparity that you find within families could have also been captured. The sample size could have increased, right? The if you think about child mortality, they could have taken up the cases of child mortality or the numbers of child mortality which were directly dependent on the levels of malnutrition, which were directly dependent on malnutrition. So yes, we can suggest various things when it comes to global hunger index, but this is primarily the one that has been mentioned here is primarily the argument of the government, that why they go on rejecting, and they use the same arguments every year. Every year in the month of October, you will find in your PIB government coming up with the counter argument. Okay, now so we have looked at hunger. We have looked at hunger and malnutrition being a problem. We have looked at various causes of malnutrition, because it is not just limited to your household sphere. It is just not limited to the availability and affordability of food. There are a range of factors which have to be considered. Then we have pretty much understood the suggestions, right? What can be the suggestions? Now I'll make this thing clear, and what I'll do is I'll definitely add a question in the upcoming weekly test from this thing. So now you see that there are multiple factors which affect malnutrition. One question can be a comprehensive one, asking about all the factors of malnutrition. Then there can be a specific question as well. Specific question like policy intervention or government intervention and hunger or malnutrition. In what way can the government intervene to put a stop to this problem of malnutrition? Or maybe it can be related only to agriculture, right? So they can end up asking a question that how agriculture can be improved to take care of this problem of malnutrition. A similar question has been asked in the past. I'll show you that question. A similar question has been asked in the past. So it is better, all the factors that you have looked into, you should know how to split those. So they can ask a question that what are the various socio-economic or socio-cultural factors because of which we find malnutrition in a country. So just think about various factors. Think about how do you split those factors. So it can be political, it can be economic, it can be limited to agriculture, it can be limited to socio-cultural factors, etc. Just think about it. How would you formulate an answer in this case? Now just think about various levels of government intervention. We have looked at various problems. Now we are saying that there is problem related to agriculture, agricultural productivity. So what can the government do? They can help with agriculture. So whatever they do to make agriculture better falls in this category. Similarly, we were saying there is problem with public distribution system. So yes, you are suggesting your National Food Security Act, within which you'll find all the things, within which you'll find your distribution system. Similarly, think of any other intervention of the government which directly impacts these causes of malnutrition. So think about maternal health, because if the mother is not well during pregnancy and after childbirth, that is basically lactating period, if the mother is not getting sufficient nutrition, what would the child get? Even the children will end up being malnourished, right? So any kind of intervention that comes to your mind can be added here. So yes, your Poshan Abhiyan, Poshan 2.0 for that matter, these can directly come under government intervention. Now other thing is, if you remember our discussion, it was about your sustainable development goal, right? We were saying that when it comes to sustainable development goals, these are basically the goals which all the countries have all the countries sat together, had a consensus and said that these are the goals which have to be achieved. Now one thing about sustainable development goal is, yes, they can ask a direct question in prelims about sustainable development goals. So all these 17 sustainable development goals should be something that you should remember. Also, they have asked a question related to education. Similarly, they can ask a question related to nutrition as well. Now, if you look at this, it talks only about sustainable development goal 2, right? So how, if we say target nutrition, if the government is working towards alleviating malnutrition, how is it that we are reaching sustainable development goal 2? How is it in line with or consonance with sustainable development goal 2? There's something simple that you can go through. Now, what if I say, and this is a question for your homework, please do remind me tomorrow if I forget, that this is the first question that we are going to discuss. Now, what you have to do is, you think about nutrition or nutrition security for that matter. Okay, you think about nutrition security, and you think about which all sustainable development goals does it help India achieve. If the Indian government works in the direction of providing nutritional security to people, which all sustainable development goals will it be targeting? Which will it be achieving? Because till now the questions that have been asked were limited to one sustainable development goal, but they can definitely ask a question which covers all. Right. So this is something that some of you are asking, what are sustainable development goals, etc. What you have to do is, this is your homework. Just search what are these sustainable development goals. What are all the 17 sustainable development goals? This is one homework that you have to check and remember. Then another thing is, what you have to do is think about nutrition security, and think about if the Indian government tries to achieve nutrition security or tries to provide people with nutrition security, which all sustainable development goals will be covered or will be targeted in this process. So this is something, because the way I was saying that if you want to look at government intervention, rather than merely thinking about your right to food as part of Article 21 or NFSA, PDS, etc., the better idea is to look at the causes or the problems related to your nutrition, that what can lead to, what all can be the causes of malnutrition, and think about what the government is doing in all those directions. Right. So you saw that malnutrition is a direct factor of your health, cleanliness, sanitation, levels of awareness, right? So all these factors should be remembered. You remember all the factors, you think of what are various government interventions in those. And now, on the similar lines, you have to think about various causes of malnutrition, or what will the government do, or what is the government doing to achieve nutrition security for the people. And in this process, what are the sustainable development goals which are getting covered? This is your homework. Please do not skip this homework. Take up this homework. Do it, because some of you are not aware of SDGs. That will help you with the awareness of SDGs, because direct questions have been asked both in prelims and mains. Similarly, if while trying to answer this question, you would have to apply your brains, you would have to storm your brain, because there are various sustainable development goals which are related to hunger, then poverty, education, etc. How would they contribute to this? They just go through these few ideas, that because these are the primary ones. If you think of public distribution system, it is something that impacts nutrition security directly, right? We have already discussed. You just go through it. Okay, now look at this question. How far do you agree with the view that focus on lack of availability of food as the main cause of hunger takes the attention away from ineffective human development policies in India? Just understand this question. So we were saying that there are various other factors apart from availability of food. Apart from availability of food, there are various other factors which impact malnutrition, which impact the levels of hunger. The question says that how far do you agree with the view that focus on lack of availability of food as the main cause of hunger, because which traditionally has been because traditionally this has been understood to be the major factor of hunger. How does that take the attention away from ineffective human development policies in India? So the simple thing is, what are the various factors? What are the various factors that cause hunger? What are the various factors that lead to malnutrition basically? In that, availability of food is one. But what are then the other factors? So one is that idea. Out of those factors, just think about which relate to human development policies. Which relate to human development policies. Okay, so let's think about the body part first, and we will come to introduction and conclusion. Think about the body part first. One is availability of food. What are the other factors? What are the other factors? Yes, so it can be related to your living conditions, safe drinking water, sanitation, etc. Affordability of food. Or when you write this answer, remember, when you think of this, when you write about this, think of affordability of nutritious food, right? So yes, there can be various factors. Yes, so you are thinking in the right direction. Size of family, etc., etc., etc. Now take this list, out of which you have to take out various factors which relate to human development policies. Think of various factors which relate directly to human development policies. Think about that. So yes, if you think of development policies, the first idea that should come to your mind is the unequal distribution of resources, the unequal, say, effectiveness, the levels of effectiveness of development policies being different in different areas. So it is related to the government interventions, in the sense that how much the government invests in most of these areas, how much the government invests, or what is the level of government intervention when it comes to ensuring clean food, clean drinking water, when it comes to sanitation, right? Great. So what you have to do basically in the body part is think of various other factors, but limit those factors to developmental policies. Please do not take up factor, because see, ultimately every factor can be related to developmental policies, but take up the factors which you are listing, take up the direct factors of which relate to developmental policies, then also briefly talk about the other factors as well. So I hope your body part can be covered. Your body part can be covered. And yes, so you are suggesting the ineffectiveness of these development policies, right? So you can briefly give an account of how these policies become ineffective. These policies can become ineffective because of design, because of implementation, right? So we need not worry about design and implementation of policies, because as we move in paper 2, this is what our main focus is going to be. And I'm deliberately keeping that part at the end so that you storm your brain completely before we discuss the process. Because in every chapter or in every module, I've added a question, either it is a previous year question or I've added a practice question which relates directly to policy implementation or design. And it has been done so that by the time we understand completely, you are storming your brain on a regular basis and you are very well prepared before we reach that stage. Okay, so now think about your introduction. Body can be done, introduction and conclusion. Think about conclusion first. Now conclusion can talk about various suggestions which will fix these issues. The issues that you have highlighted in the body part, you can just give suggestions for to fix those issues. Now think about introduction. Okay. Suggestion on implementation, suggestion, and it should not only be limited to your not only limited to lack of availability, but should be comprehensive in nature. So you can this is the part with your answer writing, because with writing more and more answers, you will understand which all points to cover, because you would have to compress. And by now you would have realized that initially a few of you were feeling that I do not have the content. Where do I get content from? But now the problem is different. You have all the content, you just have to learn how to compress it and present in the answer. Okay, introduction. So introduction about importance of food availability would not be very apt. So okay, Vaishya is saying that reason for focus on lack of availability of food. So rather than doing that, why can't we think of in what ways government has focused on availability? And that's why I was emphasizing on this point that food availability is not a problem since Green Revolution, right? So think of ways government has focused on food availability. That can be one introduction. Okay, I've skipped others. Name other factors with, also the other factors are anyways going to come in your body part. Okay, we will just cover the body part again. Please do not worry, we'll cover the body part again. Okay. Okay, so other idea is that it is not just that government has focused only on availability of food. You can portray suggesting government interventions apart from availability. So the question is saying that the government has focused only on lack of availability of food as main cause of hunger, but there are other government interventions apart from availability, right, which can be mentioned in the introduction. Yes, so yes, the suggestion that you have given, Abhishek, is right. Okay, so there can be two ways. Other thing is that you can think of various examples of say ineffective policy. You can start with an example of ineffective policy, ineffective developmental policy, and that's why I was emphasizing on this point that for years now we have a lot of availability of food. Food availability is not a problem. Then all the indicators related to development are we are doing fairly well, but still we find that the problem of hunger is not going away. What can be the reasons? And that's why I was trying to emphasize on this point so that you storm your brain. Okay, coming back to the body part, just think about this. The question is saying lack of availability of food as main cause of hunger takes attention away from ineffective human development policies. So what we have to do is we have to think of how human development policies, like your policy related to poverty alleviation, right? In poverty, we discussed that poverty and economic development go hand in hand. Poverty as a consequence of economic development. Poverty as a consequence of economic development. That is something we just saw a few minutes ago. So from there you can get your part. That is one related to poverty. The other human development aspects. Think of related to education. Think of health. Think of basic availability of sanitation, clean drinking water, right? These can be various other factors which are related to human development policies, which also impact malnutrition, which are also a direct cause of malnutrition. So the idea is, think of various causes of malnutrition, out of which you have to take out availability part. Done. Then out of those causes that we have seen previously, think of various causes which are related directly to human development policies. So there can be various things which you can mention. So what you have to do is just go back to the causes part, right? Go back to the causes part and extract things related to human development. So yes, Rashmi, if you find an example, Rashmi is suggesting if you find an example in the news, any fact related to an area where either the policies are doing well or not doing well, can we use that? You can definitely use that, but to be very honest, you would not remember during the examination. The chances are very less that you will remember those kind of facts during the examination. It'll become hard. Okay, so please just give a quick thumbs up so that I know that you have understood this question. This is a simple question based on the discussion we just had. And also what I'm saying is that you have to remember this homework. Okay, I expect at least 70% of you to take up that sustainable development goal homework, right? So that we can have a good discussion, because that will help you to broaden your horizon. So why just limit ourselves to what has already been asked? Why not think about something? Think about something that we can do better, right? Okay, great. So with this, let's do one thing. Let's take a break so that we start with our next chapter, that is on health. Okay, so let's take a break, because let's name the person who has been feeling hungry. So it is Praveen, who is very hungry. Let him or her have food and we will meet again. Okay, so 7:13 we'll meet again. We'll start our discussion on poverty, on health. And just think about this question. Okay, just think about the question that I've given and see if you can just go through these sustainable development goals by that time. Welcome back, everyone. So I hope everything is clear regarding nutrition, malnutrition, the causes, what can be the suggestions, etc. So next theme is health. Now, if you look at the syllabus, it is mentioned that health, education, and human resources. Now, what we'll do is, when it comes to human resources, that will be involved in health, human resources, they'll be involved in education, will be covered with the respective chapters. And along with it, what we'll do is we'll cover skill development separately, so that the human resources for these two uh, aspects are covered here, and the human resources in general are covered with skill development. So the first part is health. Now, before we start with health, and it extends to education as well, what you have to do is we will look at various issues related to health in India, and then we'll jump onto the policy framework that we have, right? So when we talk about education, we'll look at the problems in education, and then we'll jump to the education policy, new education policy that came out in 2020. Similarly, when it comes to health, we'll look at the problems of health, and we'll see what our health policy envisages to do. So we'll look at various measures taken up by government. But when it comes to understanding, we do not have to limit our understanding till there. If there is anything new that comes up, it has to be covered, because these are very dynamic topics. If you look at the questions from paper 2, most of the questions are dynamic in nature. So what I do is I try to cover whatever is possible, but there's a lot which you all would have to do, because there'll be new schemes coming up. They'll be, say, revisiting their strategy to target health, right? So what we'll do is we'll first look at the problems, then we'll look at what are the suggestions in our policy framework, and what programs government has started to take care of these problems. Okay, so now before we start, just look at this question. It was asked in the previous year that the deficiencies in India's public health infrastructure were brought to the forefront by the COVID-19 pandemic. Identify these deficiencies and suggest measures to avoid a similar situation in the future. Now, if you look at this question, you'll be able to understand that yes, there are various problems, because every day the newspapers were flooded with these kind of problems. The newspapers were talking about unavailability of beds. Newspapers were talking about unavailability of basic infrastructure, unavailability of medicines, etc. And on similar lines, what we'll do is we'll look at various problems related to our health infrastructure, related to infrastructure in health, related to government spending on health, the role of private sector in health. Can digitization help us take care of various problems related to health, etc. Now, please do remember that the part of nutrition that we have just covered is one of the most important factors when it comes to maintaining health. So basically, the topic of health, or rather healthcare system in India, will be divided in three parts. One will be various preventive measures that the government is coming up with. Then the other part is various curative measures. And along with that, we'll look into the health management part. That what are the various problems related to that, and what can be done to tackle those problems. Now look at health. Now generally we understand being healthy as being disease-free. Being healthy as being disease-free. But is it all that we have to understand? Is health just related to being disease-free? Not having disease, is it equivalent to health? What do you understand? What do you think? Now the basic idea here is that health is not just absence of diseases, but it is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So it again is centered around the idea of well-being. It is not just limited, the definition is not just limited to absence of diseases. So when you look at health, you do not just have to think about how can we be disease free. You have to think about how can we lead a healthy and active lifestyle. Now, there are various determinants of good health. Why are we doing this? You will understand. Access to various types of healthcare services. This is still where our understanding is generally limited. That we understand availability of healthcare infrastructure, availability of medicines, availability of doctors, etc. As being the idea of health is limited to this aspect, but there are other factors as well. There are factors about the lifestyle choices that one makes, whether one wants to lead an active lifestyle or whether it is very sedentary. It is about the choice of food. The way we were discussing in nutrition, that it is ultimately dependent on the choice of your food. Now think about this. If you make poor choices related to your eating habits, related to your lifestyle, you'll find that you would not get sufficient nutrition. If you do not have sufficient nutrition, if you are malnourished, then you are more vulnerable to falling sick. Similarly, various family social relationships, etc., also affect health. Just think about this. If you're living in a society where you do not have freedom of speech, if you're living in a family where the family discriminates on the basis of your gender, that they do not provide you sufficient say nutrition, they do not provide you with healthcare opportunities. There can be families who do not take care of the children, who do not take care of elderly. So the health or good health is basically based on various other factors, apart from being disease free, apart from the limited understanding of quality healthcare. Now let's look at various problems related to health in India, and this is something that you will be able to relate easily. And what I've done is I've used various data sets, be it from your National Family and Health Survey, be it from your sample registration system, be it from your prelude to or background to national health policy. So I've taken up various data sets to portray this. Now, a few of these will be a repetition because we are going to definitely talk about infant mortality rate, which is a direct indicator of health. We are going to talk about maternal mortality rate. Now, these ideas, these dimensions have already been covered. But again, we have to, when we look at health, we do not have to limit our understanding to a certain section. We have to take overall healthcare system in India. Now, if you think about healthcare, you find that generally we living in the cities, we understand healthcare system to be limited to a tertiary care centers, limited to your big private hospitals or either your big public hospitals that are there in the cities. But you have to understand, when you look at healthcare system, we have to cover all the dimensions because there'll be specific needs. In nutrition, we're talking about specific needs of children. If you think about nutrition, if you look at various reports, you'll find that the amount of nutrition that is generally required by children during that growing age, or the amount of nutrition that is required by a pregnant or a lactating woman, is way more than and is way diverse compared to the general understanding, because we think that having protein, fats, carbohydrates, etc. in sufficient amount is all we need. But ultimately, you'll find specific needs coming from specific sections, right? So it'll be say if you remember the data, many women in our country are facing the problem of anemia. Now, to tackle that, you need say targeted approach. Similarly, if you think of child nutrition, what is it that should be contained in child nutrition? Now, you do not have to go into the finer aspects that what should be the ideal balanced diet, right? What should be the balanced diet, etc. Because we're not talking about the say impact of health on a particular section. And even when we look about, if we think about health and particular sections, we look at various determinants of health. We do not have to specify the nutritional requirement because that is something that they would not ask. Yes, if it is part of a scheme program, they might end up asking a question in prelims, but they would not ask a comprehensive question in the mains examination. So let's look at the status of healthcare in India. Now, the first idea is, when we look at health, we are saying that it is not just limited to health system. On the basis of various reports, you find that if we talk about determinants of health, only 10% weightage is given to health system related factors, whether there is availability of doctors or not, whether there is availability of medicines or not. This consists only of 10%. The major part of it, the major chunk of it, goes to your lifestyle, the kind of lifestyle choices you make, the levels of nutrition that you have, and various other biological and environmental factors. So when we think of health, do not just think of health in, say, curative sense. Do not just think of health as, say, going to a hospital and getting it treated. And if you remember, during COVID, there are a lot of promotive steps, etc., that the government had taken. And we will come to all those. So you remember that most of the weightage has to be given to the kind of lifestyle choices you make, how active a lifestyle you lead, whether you go for workout or not, whether you engage in any kind of sports or not, right? Then if you think of health, you think of life expectancy directly, that how long, because if a person is healthy, they live longer. If a person is healthy, they live longer. That's what it is. So if you look at life expectancy in India, it is close to 70 years, right? It has actually exceeded 70 years now. And it is being said that it is being projected that it will go on increasing over the years. It will increase by at least 4 to 5 years in the coming 5 years. But if you compare the life expectancy in India to our neighbors, just look at it. In terms of expenditure on health, we are lagging behind. In terms of life expectancy, we are lagging behind. In terms of infant mortality rate, we are lagging behind compared to our tiny neighbors who do not even have sufficient resources. So one idea is clear, that it is not just about how much resources a country has, but it is also about how well do we invest those, whether they are, say, used in right direction or not. And also, when you think of life expectancy, let me ask you a question. Just think of a person living in Delhi and think of a person living in the Himalayan state of Uttarakhand. Whom do you think would have more life expectancy? A person living in the polluted environment of Delhi, or a person living in the comparatively cleaner environment of Uttarakhand or any other Himalayan state? So yes, most of you are saying that it'll be person from Uttarakhand who will have better life expectancy. But actually, if you look at the numbers, you'll find that it is Delhi where people have better life expectancy at birth. Again, why? Because it is not, even though we say that the health system related factors contribute to only 10%, but we find that it is primarily because of availability of better availability of healthcare in Delhi that directly contributes to life expectancy. It is your institutional births which contribute to life expectancy. It is the levels of awareness of people which contributes directly to life expectancy. And again, we do not have to go in the numbers. We just have to understand that yes, there'll be a few rules, few general rules, but there'll be exceptions as well. Also, you'll find that in rural areas, the life expectancies will be low compared to urban areas. Simple reason, again, being availability of better healthcare system. So you might dispute this argument, dispute this report saying that more weightage can be given to health related systems as well. It is not just limited to the lifestyle, the environment, etc. So you'll always find exceptions to the general rules, but you always you have to remember when it comes to health, because life expectancy, yes, it is also a good measure of health, but it is not the only measure of health, right? So the quality of life that you lead is also important, because a person who's living in polluted environment, who's living in a very stressful environment, their quality of life compared to a person living in cleaner surroundings, etc., is poor, right? So quality of life also matters. So it is not just these indicators. Please remember, it is not just these indicators, or it is not just the objective idea of health that we have to look into. We have to look into the comprehensive idea of health. And that's why I have mentioned these factors. Now, coming to next part, that is mental health. One is, if you go around looking in the city, if I ask, most of you would say that you do not know any mental health practitioner in your area. You do not know a clinical psychologist in your city. And even if you go out to find someone practicing mental health, or someone working in the same field, either a counseling psychologist, clinical psychologist, or psychiatrist, you'll find that there is a great lack. There's a huge gap when it comes to mental health. Because one idea is, people are not aware. The moment you think of mental health, you get an idea that someone has gone mad, someone is behaving in a different manner, in socially unacceptable manner. That's what our idea directly goes to the moment we think of mental health. But mental health also the idea is very comprehensive. At times you'll feel that, okay, I'm feeling low. And yes, most of the times you'll find that the feeling goes away. With time, the feeling goes away in a day or two, or maximum a week. But at times, what we do is we make peace with that feeling. We become comfortable with that feeling. And that feeling goes on extending. They'll remain persistent in your life, but you get used to it. And if someone suggests that, see, sir, I do not feel that everything is all right with you, you should go check with a mental health practitioner. And you would say, no, I'm completely fine, and it is nothing like that. But those problems, if they persist for a long time, it is going to definitely impact all the dimensions of your life, be it your personal life, be it your private life, be it your social life. So if you see that when we think of mental health, there is a lot of problem, because we do not have sufficient practitioners. The availability of human resources is low. Awareness in people is also low. And you find, if you think of mental health, and if you remember COVID times, most of the people, you find that they were facing some problem or the other. People were undergoing a lot of stress because a lot of them lost their jobs. People were under stress because they were forced to live inside their houses. People were under stress because they were living with their families. And that's when you find that there was a rise in the cases of mental health. There was a rise in the cases of divorce. There's a rise in cases of domestic violence, which are all direct indicators of mental health. So mental health, again, is a problem. We do not have sufficient human resources. We do not have sufficient awareness. And this is something that has to be normalized. Then you think of the increasing proportion of elderly in our population. And we were saying that every section has different needs. Every section of the population has diverse needs. When it comes to nutrition, they have diverse needs. When it comes to healthcare, they have diverse needs. Your women have to be dealt in a different manner. When it comes to, say, pregnant women and lactating women, the needs are different. When it comes to elderly, they also need specialized care. When it comes to children, they also have, and you find that you have doctors, specific doctors for specific sections. There'll be clinics, there'll be hospitals which will be centered only around issues related to children. Then now you find that over the years, the elderly population has been increasing, and it is projected to increase even further, if you remember our discussion on elderly. Now, with the increasing proportion of elderly, do you think we have, say, healthcare system adapting to it? Is the healthcare system also adapting to the growing demands, or the demands which are to grow further in the future of the elderly? And the answer is no. We do not have a lot of specialized practitioners when it comes to geriatric care. That is basically related to elderly. Similarly, the problems related to children. One problem we have just seen, the problem of malnutrition, because if we think of malnutrition, we think of wasting, we think of child mortality rate, we think of stunting, underweight, etc. Also, another problem related to it is the decreasing sex ratio in a few states. The sex ratio is also a problem because it also portrays the condition of women or the condition of girls in our society, because they are not being provided. Why the maternal mortality rate is high? One is lack of awareness. Second is the discrimination that they face when it comes to basic necessities. And if you remember, in the chapter on women, I'd shown you some data related to availability of basic healthcare, availability of education, etc., which is also problematic. And while we are discussing these problems, I hope various schemes, government policies, government interventions are coming to your mind. What we'll do is, all those things that you have in your mind, we are going to fit those in the basic framework of your health policy. I'll tell you, most of the data that is here is basically coming from the backdrop to National Health Policy 2017, because that was the last policy that we had, that we saw, and the government is working in the same direction, right? So it'll be another 10-15 years by the time they change their policy. So most of the data is coming from there. Okay, now the burden of particularly non-communicable diseases, it amounts for 60% of all the deaths that happen in our country. What kinds of non-communicable diseases? Can anyone suggest? Yes, various new lifestyle diseases that are coming up, like diabetes, cancer, issues related to heart. These contribute to 60% of all the deaths that happen. Now, when we say non-communicable, let's stick to non-communicable, and we can think of other problems, other communicable diseases like AIDS, etc. later. Now, just think about various programs of the government that are working in that direction. Then you think about the various vaccination programs, etc., various disease control programs that India has run, and you see that polio, for that matter, has been a great success. Then there are other programs as well to control diseases. Think about your programs related to HIV. And if you remember, okay, so we have not discussed transgender so far. When we discuss that, we are going to emphasize a little on HIV for that matter. So it has been going down over the years. So it is 2011. By now, if you see, it will be somewhere around 0.18, because it has been on a decline over the years. So as far as I remember, in 2019, it has come down to 0.18%. But now you think about the population of a country and think about 0.20% of it. Don't you think that is a lot of burden? That is a lot of cases, for that matter. That yes, we have been doing well when it comes to a few things, a few programs, but then there are few others which are becoming a problem. Now think about tuberculosis, the problem related to TB. So yes, it has been on a decline, but over the years now you find that there is something new that has come up, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And we will discuss that, do not worry. Multi-drug resistant is something that you would have read in Science and Technology. So the cases of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis are on a rise over the years. Similarly, these are few indicators related to maternal and child health. This is the same data that we have seen previously. Look at infant mortality rate in India. Look at the infant mortality rate in the countries that we dream to, or we think that we have been passing them by. For example, China. We think that, yes, there is a direct competition, but we are way better. Similarly, our neighbors. Just compare these numbers with India. How well they have been doing compared to that. Similarly, if you think of maternal mortality rate, it is still high. There are, say, differences, because if you look at a few states, obviously Kerala, etc., you'll find that they have been doing well. But then there are states like Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., where it is very high, where it's still very high. That means there has to be a focus on maternal health and child health as well. So there are disparities. Always keep noting the disparities between states and between urban and rural areas. You do not have to remember any number. Yes, the numbers related to total fertility rate would have become by hearted now, right? Because there's something that we have repeated over and over again. But you do not have to remember or cram any numbers for that matter, but you should have a general idea that what is happening. Then also we find that when it comes to healthcare and the idea, I said it is generally the big private hospitals that we think of, and we know there are problems. We know that affordability is a problem. Yes, if I ask you, where would you want to go if it comes to a health related emergency, and most of you would say that I would better rather go to a private hospital than something that keeps us at bay from going to private hospitals is the affordability aspect. Yes, they have world-class service, they have pretty much everything that you need, but affordability becomes an issue. There are a lot of malpractices that go around in private hospitals because a lot of cases keep coming every day in the newspapers. The hospital was say knee deep in this scam. During COVID times, if you remember the bills that the hospitals were giving. So private hospitals, yes, there is a rise of private healthcare industry, which is good because we are getting quality care now. We have multiple options now. But also you find that it is becoming a problem as well. So there is something that needs to be done. So we'll see what can be done about private healthcare system. Then with particularly related to private healthcare system is your out-of-pocket expenditure that you have to spend more and more. We will explain what exactly out-of-pocket expenditure is, but think about this, that you have to spend on the medicines, you have to spend on the services that they provide, you have to spend on the various laboratory tests, etc., which has been on a rise. Even though we talk about achieving universal health coverage, right? Even your policy talks about universal health coverage. It has been the talk of the town. But we find that the out-of-pocket expenditure has been rising over the years, which is becoming a problem. Why? Because nearly 30% of our population is devoid of any kind of health insurance. And now this is also a very conservative estimate. This coming from a NITI Aayog report, a very recent NITI Aayog report. But again, it is a very conservative estimate because there are problems related to calculation or the head counts, etc. That will come to, we will discuss when we discuss this report. But most of the people do not have insurance. If you do not have insurance, you have to spend from your pocket, which is getting higher and higher, which is also a problem with our healthcare system. The way we saw that we do not have sufficient healthcare practitioners when it comes to mental health, you find that overall our healthcare system is facing a problem of human resource crunch. If you remember your experience with COVID is something that tells you the story, that makes everything clear, that we do not have sufficient beds in the hospitals, we do not have sufficient number of doctors, nurses and other healthcare practitioners. And I'll show you a few numbers that the average has to be X, but we are lagging way behind. That for every 10,000 people, we should have this number of healthcare practitioners, but we do not have. So lack of human resources when it comes to healthcare. And when we discuss this, things are coming to your mind that what can be done, right? Because if we do not have sufficient number of colleges, we would not have sufficient number of healthcare practitioners. So it has to start from the scratch. Increase the number of colleges so that you have more number of healthcare practitioners. And we will definitely see various problems related to human resources. Now, we see that there are various problems. We find that we have inadequate infrastructure when it comes to beds, etc. We have less and less number of healthcare practitioners. There are problems related to private healthcare industry. But we still find that the spending on healthcare in India is still low, is very low. So the average can be around the suggested percentage of GDP to be spent on health is around 6%, that which will be ideal to take care of all our issues. Now again, there is a caveat that will come to, but we find that it is merely 2% of our GDP, which is very low for a country of our scale, for the problems that we have, for the scale of problems, think about the problems that we have and think about the investment that the government is making. Because if the government does not invest, the private players would consider urban areas, as simple as that. They would open up their hospitals, better quality services will be provided only in urban areas. But what happens to the rural India? Because rural areas are mostly dependent on public healthcare infrastructure, and particularly the poor. And when I say private and public, do not think of private sector as limited only to your big hospitals, your small clinics, etc. everywhere across the country. They are also part of private healthcare system. And we'll see what are the problems related to that. Then also you find that to do something better, to make things better, you would have to always invest in R&D, research and development. But research and development is also an area where we are lagging behind. So you think that if you look into your news and if you look at to what various politicians have to say, we say that Indians are the best when it comes to research and development. But if you look at the investment in healthcare or research related to healthcare, it is not even 1%. It is not even 1% of the entire healthcare budget that we do not invest in any kind of research and development. And that is the reason we have to rely more and more on others, on foreign countries, on various companies to invest on research. So these are basically the problems related to your healthcare system. Apart from this is not an exhaustive list in any manner, but apart from this, there can be other problems. Whatever we have mentioned so far, apart from this, can you think of any other problem related to healthcare system in India? It can be about quality of healthcare, because quality of healthcare is not something objective or something that we can count. So the quality of healthcare is also under question. Then is there any other thing that comes to your mind? So yes, lack of infrastructure. Then distance in villages is basically about accessibility. Think of your elderly. Do you think the elderly have accessible healthcare available to them? Concentration of healthcare in urban areas. Think of your equipments, etc., that are being used in your general private hospitals. Yes, great. Great. So X5 has suggested that there is a lack of trust. There's a trust gap between public healthcare system and people in general. That when I asked you this question, whether you would want to go to a private hospital or a public hospital, most of you said private hospitals. Don't you think there is a gap, there is a trust deficit between us, the people, and public healthcare infrastructure? So yes, so there are various other problems as well. It is not an exhaustive list. And if there is something new that comes up, you should vouch, you should take up and mention it in your notes. Now, any policy for that matter, if you because now we are starting with policies in education as well, we are going to stick to various policies, etc., or the national education policy. You find that the policy, basically any policy, say policy related to health, it will first talk about the objective. What is the objective that they want to achieve? Then to achieve that objective, they'll have various programs, short-term goals or quantified goals, that by this year we want to reach this. By this year we want to eliminate, say, HIV, for instance. So this policy will tell you about the overall framework, overall objective, that this is the objective we have to reach, and the framework to reach that objective, to fulfill that objective. In this context, you have National Health Policy 2017. You do not have to go through the policy. Most of the important things have been extracted out of the policy and provided here. All you have to do is, if there are any new programs that come up, because now you whatever problems that you find mentioned there are basically coming from backdrop of your national health policy. So your policy, when you formulate a policy, you first identify the problems. Now, these are the problems that we want to fix, and this is our objective that we want to reach. Now, to take care of these problems, take care of these issues and to reach our objective, what can be done? What should be done? Those are your various short-term and long-term goals. So all that happens actually comes from the problems that have been identified in your national health policy. So the backdrop that we saw, that the maternal and child mortality rates have declined, but they're still high. There is regional disparity when it comes to maternal and child mortality rates. Then you think of the rise of private healthcare industry. Think of increase in expenditure due to healthcare. And if you remember, we were saying that even in poverty, we are saying healthcare is a major factor. That one health-related emergency in a household can actually bring you from above the poverty line to deep below the poverty line. That is the state of healthcare expenditure in our country. With that, you see that we have the government has more and more revenues now. And they can definitely invest on healthcare. They can increase their spending on healthcare. But there are problems. Now look at the overall objective that the national health policy wants to achieve. This is what will form the framework in your mind how we have to approach the chapter on health. Till now, we have just identified the problems. The chances are very less. Yes, they might ask a question directly on what are the challenges related to healthcare in India. But the more chances are that a question will be asked about what are the various government interventions, what are the problems related to government programs, etc. What are the challenges related to healthcare, and what are the government interventions, and what can be the possible suggestions. That is where your questions will come from. And I have also predicted a couple of questions which can be asked. Let's see, we will discuss them once we reach there. And this objective of the policy will decide how we are going to proceed, what are going to be the problems. Because all the measures that the government has been taking up in the past few years come directly from this national health policy. Those are various programs which have been identified under national health policy. Yes, the names of the programs would not be there. So they would have identified the problem of maternal health. So they'll come up with a program now. So all these programs that come up related to health, any betterment in health, even if you talk about push towards Ayush, etc., everything is coming from your national health policy framework. So let's look at the objective. It talks about the attainment of highest possible level of health and well-being for all at all ages. So everyone, including your children, elderly, your female, transgender, and other adult population, everyone is to be covered, is to be provided highest possible level of health. Now, when they say health, it is again not limited. This idea of health is not just being disease-free. The idea of health and well-being is basically covering all the dimensions of life as discussed through a preventive and promotive healthcare orientation. Through a preventive, one is preventive that you easily understand, and then there is promotive healthcare which will come to, and universal access to good quality healthcare services without anyone having to face financial hardships as a consequence. We will understand this. Now they're saying that one is you have to cover all the sections of the population, provide them with good health and well-being. It is not just about opening up of new healthcare centers. It is not just about making medicines available for free. It is not just about providing compulsory insurance. It is about covering all the other dimensions of life as well. Then they talk about increasing the access to healthcare system, because we find that you do not have adequate healthcare infrastructure in all the places, so you have to provide them access, everyone access. Now, when it comes to access, there'll be certain disadvantaged sections. Just think of your differently abled, just think of your elderly who might need services at doorstep, who might need, say, help of your remote healthcare services. Then they talk about the quality. The quality of healthcare provided in India is more or less when it comes to particularly public health is poor. Even though we say that private healthcare industry is booming, is doing great, they are providing quality service, etc. But when it comes to public health, which most of the people avail, we do not have good quality. So providing access to healthcare to the ones who are not able to access healthcare system, then provide quality healthcare, and also providing affordable healthcare. It has to be affordable. Yes, there can be a hospital in your vicinity, but if they charge, say, if the charges start from 2,000 for a basic appointment, would you be able to afford it? The answer is no. So the policy talks about providing access to quality and affordable healthcare. They also talk about preventive and promotive healthcare. Now, one is cure, right? You read that quote, prevention is better than cure. So prevention is preventing the diseases from happening by government intervention, spreading awareness, etc. Cure is basically treating someone who is ill. If you get any kind of illness, sickness, there can be, say, measures taken to cure that problem, right? If you have fever, then there can be a cure. Prevention can be talking about, say, being immune to something. Think of your vaccination. What is that? A preventive measure, so that you do not fall sick because of that problem. Now think of promotive healthcare. Now here, the all who are here, can you think of promotive healthcare? What is promotive healthcare? So one is stop before anything happens. Other thing is providing services after you have fallen sick. But then what is promotive? If we're talking about promotive, what can be this promotive healthcare? Can anyone suggest? Okay, so some of you are suggesting awareness. Now, if you think of awareness, that comes as a part of preventive measures as well, then a few are in right place. Just think about yoga. Now the government is saying yes, it is preventive. Why? Because it would it'll help you from getting from falling sick. If you engage in yoga, it will help you in keeping your body, mind and soul healthy, and it will prevent you from falling sick. But it is promotive in the sense that now you are making people a part of this. The stakeholders are becoming a part of the process. When it comes to preventive, it is mostly being provided by the government. They are the ones who are intervening. Now the government is, yes, making you aware. The government is telling you, it is with your support that we can help you keeping yourself healthy. So providing, including the public, including the stakeholders, and making them a part of the system, making them a part of your approach. That is what it is. Yes, so if you think of promotive healthcare, you think of your Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, you think of yoga that the government has popularized. Now again, you think about this, that this is also coming from directly from your policy, right? So it is not random that there has been a push towards yoga, it is part of your policy. Okay, so what are they talking about? They're talking about providing access to good quality and affordable healthcare. Then they are also talking about covering all the sections of population and providing preventive and promotive healthcare orientation. Now just think about this. When we talk of access, quality and affordability, do they go hand in hand, or can there be a problem? Can there be a problem if you want to provide quality and affordable healthcare? Can there be a problem with that? Or is it easy? Is it very simple? What do you think? It'll be hard, because you think about this. If you take these three aspects, you take quality, access and affordability. So one idea is that your universal health coverage means the same. The objective of the policy is basically universal health coverage, which means people have access to full range of quality health services that they need, when and where they need it, without any financial hardship. So basically, universal health coverage talks about providing access to quality and affordable healthcare. That is what the objective of the policy is. Now think about these three. Just take example. If you say that I want to provide quality healthcare, you say that you want to provide quality healthcare. The moment you start improving the quality, the cost that you will incur will go on rising. Just think about your good ICU units, right? There is a fixed cost that is associated with it. Think about your better quality medicines. Everything has a cost related to it. So the moment you say that I want to improve the quality, the cost is going to is going to increase. And what is happening? That yes, now you have quality healthcare, but it is not affordable. Similarly, if you want to work out the affordability, if you want to say that, okay, I want to make healthcare affordable, it is going to affect the quality of services because you would not be able to provide services. Similarly, if you want to increase the access, if you want to open multiple hospitals, that healthcare services are available to all, they are there in their vicinity, then can you possibly maintain quality? Because you would not have sufficient human resources for the same. You would not have sufficient infrastructure for the same. So if you think about these three ideas, they do not go hand in hand. And this is what the iron triangle of health is, which says, and which has a challenge that if you want to improve on one of the aspects, if you want to improve the quality, then it will have a cost or it will have a bearing on affordability. Similarly, if you want to improve access, it will have a bearing on one of the other factors. So they say, yes, two of these factors can be achieved easily. It's not going to be a problem, but it is definitely going to impact or it is going to affect one of the three factors for sure. So yes, the objective looks beautiful, that everyone gets quality and affordable healthcare, but it is not so practical. It is not something that we can simply achieve. Now, your national health policy talks about achieving universal health coverage. They talk about the trust deficit that we have between people and public healthcare system. They want to bridge that deficit. How do you want to do that? We will come to that. Then also, we are saying that there has been a rise in private sector. The government itself cannot have all the resources to make the healthcare system good or to achieve the objectives that they can. So they will definitely need help from private sector. Now, if you talk about private sector works primarily on the motive of profit. When it comes to public health or comes to any kind of public service, they basically think of providing services. They basically think of the citizens. They basically think of the people. People are at the center stage. But when it comes to private sector, profit is at the center stage. So they are saying that yes, we will definitely need help from private sector, but we would have to align the growth of private sector with public health goals. Why? Because the private sectors will think that we will go on opening the institutions or the hospitals in urban areas. But the need of the hour is that you provide primary healthcare facilities to rural masses. So there has to be a congruence in the ideas. There has to be, they have to reach an agreement. So these are basic goals or objectives of your national health policy. They also have a few quantitative goals and objectives that you need not worry about, do not have to remember. That they talk about dealing with infant mortality rate, they talk about increasing the life expectancy rate, etc. So there are various things. Now what we'll do is, we have identified the problems, we have looked at the framework of your national health policy. Now what we are going to do is, we'll discuss various measures that the government is taking in these directions, right? You remember that the government has to think of providing access to all, the government has to make it affordable, and the government has to think of bridging the gap between public health and your general public. right? So keeping all these things in mind, let's see what all problems are there, what are the problems that we have identified, and what the government is doing in those directions. Okay, so Femina, you can keep your suggestions right now. We are definitely going to come to suggestions part as well. Let's see what other questions are there. So Femina, when you say that rich people only get access to quality and affordable health services, now again, it is not affordable. It is affordable for them, but overall it is not affordable. Okay, so now let's think of health management first, then we'll talk about your various preventive measures, and we'll finally come to your curative measures that are being taken by the government. Now the first idea is, why not government invests more and more in public health? Then what can be the role of private sector? The first idea is, when it comes to public expenditure, we see that it is somewhere around 2% of the GDP, which has to be even the health policy envisages to take it to 6% of GDP. Now the health policy says that 6% of the GDP is something that should ideally be achieved, but they have kept the target to around 3.5% of the GDP. So there is say incongruency within the policy framework itself. So yes, desirable is 6% of the GDP, but right now we are at 2%. What will happen if we increase the public expenditure on health? What can be the consequences of it? Because this increase in public expenditure on health is going to fix various problems. What are the problems it can fix? Just think about it. It will take up the problem, or it will cover the problem of access to healthcare. It will take care of the problem of affordability. Ultimately, if the government is investing more in it, people will also feel, right? People will feel, yes, the government is doing something for us, hence bridging the trust deficit. So yes, better quality of public healthcare will be available, because they'll ultimately invest this money on infrastructure, basic infrastructure. They'll invest this money on training their human resources. They'll invest this money on making the medicines cheaper. They'll invest this money on research and development, right? So various problems that we have seen can easily be tackled if we increase public expenditure on health. So if a question like this can be asked, if a question like this is asked, that how can increased expenditure on public health can help government achieve its objectives under the national health policy, you are ready with your answer. Because all the problems that we have identified, this is something which has the potential of taking it up and solving those problems. But this is something that we do not have the resources for. Yes, you can question the intent of the government, you can question the misplaced priorities of the government, but ultimately the reality is that we do not have those kind of resources. So what is the option? The other option is bring in private sector. The other option is bring in private sector. That if the private sectors comes into picture, it will help us with providing universal health coverage. So why do we need private sector? To fill in the gaps. To fill in the gaps that are being left by your public healthcare system. So that is the basic requirement for privatization, and your national health policy also talks about privatization for that matter. They talk about bringing in your private healthcare system and your public goals on the same page. This is what it is. No, see, Prashvi, just think about this. We are saying that whatever taxes, whatever revenue we have right now, the revenue of the government that we have right now, using 6% out of it. Because again, taxation is progressive. Just think about this, with the increase in GDP, there has been an increase in the government revenue for that matter over the years. And yes, they have been suspending a little more every year when it comes to health, but ultimately it is not sufficient. So we are not saying that you go on taxing people or introduce various cess for that matter to cover up this thing. But yes, using the same sources, using the same resources, and putting them in healthcare. And also, I'll tell you on this line, I'll tell you that it is not directly proportional to public healthcare spending. Achieving universal healthcare or universal health coverage is not directly proportional to public spending in health, because you have an example. You have example of various countries. As far as I remember, it is right now, for example, Maldives is working on it for achieving universal health coverage. They're not spending so much, but ultimately the idea is you have to look at various determinants of health, because it is not just about, this money is not entirely going into creating new infrastructure. It is not entirely going into healthcare management. This money is going into preventive healthcare, promotive healthcare. Just look at the numbers of China. If you see, and I'll come up with a solution. I have a question for that, and let's see by that time if anyone comes up with that suggestion. So if you see in China that they have been investing in traditional medicine as well. And when it comes to traditional medicine, one, it is we cannot conclusively say that it is always better than your Western medicine. But yes, it has good potential, because it is generally lack of research that we find is problematic when it comes to traditional medicine. But China has very well integrated their traditional medicine with Western medicine. And ultimately, it reflects on the numbers, because it is cheaper. It is available everywhere. The only thing that we have to do is to promote it. And you think about it, yes, so you have a push towards Ayush, right? You have a push towards Ayush. And we will come to that. I have a nice question framed for you all that you would have to think about. And let's see by that time whether you come up with that idea or not, by the time we come for this question. So yes, we know that we need private sector, we need inputs from private sector, resources from private sector to fill in these gaps. What will be the benefits? What can be the possible benefits of privatization of healthcare system in India? One, you'll have better choices. You'll have multiple choices to choose from. Then think about the quality of services that they provide. Right, they'll have good doctors, they'll have better infrastructure, the quality of services is going to be good. Yes, so when it comes to trust factor, the general population portrays more trust in private healthcare system compared to public healthcare system. Yes, so it is going to be efficient, it is going to be effective, etc. So there can be various benefits of privatization, and these benefits of privatization come from everywhere. Because you think about privatization in any other sector, and you can apply the same logic, extend the same arguments here. The government does not have enough to spend on public healthcare or basic infrastructure, private sector can. The government is not able to provide with good quality medicines, good quality healthcare, the private sector can. Now you think of the challenges, because that's where it becomes problematic. Well, there are various challenges related to privatization. The first idea being profit orientation of the private sector, because their entire idea is based around profit. Profit is at the center stage. Ultimately, it is profit which will be given primacy over any other factor, even if it is something of ethical concern, right? And you see those examples. Again, the problem is affordability. What other problems can be there? Yes, so your rural-urban divide. Then you think of, to meet these profit requirements, they will enter into various malpractices. Right, so they would suggest, and here is an example for you. You can just use this link later during revision. Just go through it. It's a small read. So they can take to various malpractices. They can inflate your bills. They can go for a surgery which was not even required. They'll primarily focus on, and if you go to a private hospital, the primary focus is basically on to capitalize from the patients, to capitalize on the problems of the patients. Even if you go with a headache, it would not be strange if they suggest a surgery for the same, right? So yes, ultimately, these can be various problems related to private sector. Now, yes, a direct question might not be asked on this, right? But a question can definitely be asked on how this public and private sector can align. How can they get into partnership to achieve these goals? So you have to think in terms of how we can use this privatization to achieve universal health coverage. That is the basic objective of our national health policy. Just think in those terms, and that would be all that you need to know. Then coming to this, you find that let's go back to the list. You find that one of the problems related to healthcare system is increase in out of pocket expenditure. What can be a solution to that? Health insurance. And we will come to that. Now, the next part is about your human resources. We say that we do not have sufficient human resources when it comes to healthcare system, and not just healthcare system. Even when it comes to education, we find we have a lot of vacancies for your lecturers, for your teachers, and the government is not filling those. The teacher to pupil ratio is very low. Similarly, here you'll find the ratio of healthcare practitioners to the general population is very low. So if you look at these numbers, according to WHO, 44.5 healthcare professionals per 10,000 population is something that is desirable, because these are based on various calculations, various projections, estimations, because not everyone is going to fall sick at the same time, right? So the number basically comes from a lot of interpolations. But in India, we have only the half of the required or the desirable number. We do not have sufficient healthcare practitioners. And you would have read this, that when it comes to India, it is among the list of 57 most critically endangered countries in terms of human resource availability. And there are various numbers. If you look at healthcare professionals, do not just limit your idea to doctors. You have other practitioners as well. You have your nurses, you have your midwives, etc. And you find, if you look at these numbers, you do not have to remember anything. If you look at these numbers, there's a lot of disparity between states. So obviously, Kerala has the highest number, and you'll find states like Odisha, Rajasthan, Bihar lagging behind. Similarly, this talks about the percentage increase in the number of healthcare professionals in India. That yes, there has been an increase, but still we find there's a lot of gap. It is half the rate at which we are increasing. So everywhere you'll find that there are gaps. Now, apart from the number of healthcare practitioners, can there be other problems? Apart from the number of healthcare practitioners, can there be other problems? And the answer is yes. How about the quality of healthcare professionals? How about a lot of unqualified health professionals that you generally find in your tier 2, 3 cities, that you generally find in your rural areas? So one is availability, one is the issue with numbers, that they are not available in good numbers. There is a lot of gap. Then there are other problems related to quality. Then the government estimations from various organizations are different. The number of doctors who are actually registered is different. Numbers coming from different registration systems are different. Then you'll find that if you look at the distribution here, you'll find that your central and eastern states are lagging way behind. If you think in Delhi, Delhi also has a good number. Think of Kerala, has a good number of practitioners. But if you come to central and eastern states, the numbers are very low. Then you have a disparity, or there is a unequal distribution between human resources or healthcare professionals in urban and rural areas. And why do you think that most of the healthcare practitioners want to move towards urban areas? What is the reason? Brashmi, I did not get your point. Infertile, I don't understand. So yes, they would want to live in urban areas for a better lifestyle. The remuneration is better. Most of your private hospitals are there in urban areas who pay better. They have better, per se, perks. Apart from the salary, apart from the basic remuneration, they have better perks. They live in a better lifestyle. The children have better schools to go to. They live in a better society. So these are various factors on the basis of which people prefer urban setups, right? Then you find that majority of our workforce is there in private sector. People will find that because of low remuneration, because of no clarity on perks, unavailability of a lot of things, people or doctors or healthcare practitioners generally go for private sector because of various factors. And then you also find that the number of our institutions are less. We do not have sufficient number of medical colleges in the country, because of which the number of health practitioners that come out of those colleges are not sufficient. Then also there is a question on the capacity of those doctors or those healthcare professionals, because no proper training is provided. So these are various issues related to healthcare professionals. What can be done? Provide quality training. What can be done? There should be a separate department, should be a cell which will look into the training aspect, what has to be the subject matter of training, which has to look into the projections that the population is growing at this rate, the elderly proportion is growing at this rate, so we should have these number of practitioners here in these sectors. So there has to be a body to look into all these aspects. Then you set up medical colleges in rural areas. Now what happens is that the requirements of rural areas are different, right? They would not have lifestyle diseases so much. Simple comparison between urban and rural areas, they would not have. In rural areas, people would not face lifestyle diseases as much as people are going to face the same in urban areas. So their requirements are going to be different. They'll fall sick because of multiple reasons, right? Because they're working in the fields, so they'll have different problems compared to urban areas. They do not face the problem of pollution, right? So they have different needs. And we find that most of our practitioners are concentrated in urban areas. So if we want more and more people in rural areas, the idea is to take up people from rural areas, open up institutions in rural areas, prefer students coming from rural backgrounds, because ultimately they'll have a sense of giving it back to their community. Because ultimately we find lack of social responsibility in general masses in our country is a problem, because we do not take responsibility for anything at all. We only limit our understanding, we only limit everything to our own self, and maybe extend it to just our family. And this is an approach in political science that you need not worry about. But the idea is that people do not take up social responsibility. So if you take up people from rural areas, take up people from there, they would want to work in their area, they would want to work in their region. Then also, this is something that you promote in people, that okay, why don't you serve in rural areas, it is better, etc., etc. Then you can actually go for mandatory provisions as well. And we find that one of the problems with our human resources is brain drain. That they study in colleges in India and they leave for abroad. They study in government colleges, they get quality education, and then they leave the country, go work in other countries. Why? Because of better remuneration, etc. So one idea is to hold them back, provide them with better perks, remuneration, etc. Provide them with better facilities in rural areas, take up people from rural areas who would want to work in the region, orient our studies, because right now the approach is different. They do not have, say population specific studies, right? It is more general in nature. So oriented towards rural areas, so that there are enough medical practitioners, and also there can be mandatory efforts. Like if you study from a government college, then you would have to mandatorily serve for 2 years in rural areas, right? Because at times it is not, we cannot always say count on a change of heart, but at times you have to make mandatory efforts, right? So yes, there are traffic lights, etc., everything is there, people are supposed to follow it, people are being made aware, it is being checked before they give you a license, it is being checked whether you know all the rules, whether you know how to drive properly, etc. But ultimately, they have to penalize. Why? Because a lot of you, a lot of us will go on breaking the signal, will ride in the wrong lane, right? So there can be mandatory efforts like rural posting as well, which will pretty much fix the problems of human resource management. But again, the problem here is that this will also need a lot of investment to open up colleges. Now, if you rely on public or you rely on private sector to open up these colleges, the fees is going to be high. The government does not have the kind of revenue or the kind of money to invest in education or medical education. So this is something, again, the more we move towards paper 2, you'll find we'll talk about a lot of ideas. We'll talk about things on an ideal level, which more often than not you'll find are not practical, right? So this is going to be a problem. So let's I'm not saying that you have to stop applying logic here, but yes, you know the problem, you identify the problem, think of a solution, and that would be it. There'll be a lot of suggestions which will be impractical for that matter. Now you think of basic infrastructure. Now, when you think of basic infrastructure, right now I've mentioned about shortages of various your primary healthcare centers, etc. Now you think in terms of, now you have to think more in terms of Ayushman Bharat health and wellness centers. Now I'll tell you the thing. So as a program under your national health policy, you have various Ayushman Bharat health and wellness centers which are opened across the country. Now these are basically a revamped version of the existing community healthcare centers, primary healthcare centers, etc., which were there. So now they have revamped them and renamed them as Ayushman Healthcare and Wellness Centers. And there are few differences as well. And if you have read, if you have gone through this Ayushman Bharat scheme, you will realize that how it is different. Right. So I've given a short write-up, I believe, here. Okay, I haven't, but you just go through Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers. Now, this is something that is being done to take care of the problems related to basic infrastructure, because the number of beds that are available are less. The human resources have already been discussed. There is shortage of these centers or healthcare centers, particularly in rural areas. If you remember, in COVID times, most of the primary healthcare centers were non-functional, were not even functioning, right? There were various ground reports for that matter. Then I've given a few other things, because it is not just related to limited to availability of beds. It is also extends to availability of basic services like clean drinking water. Because even if you go to a public hospital, particularly in rural areas, you'll find the state of sanitation in mess there. The hospital itself is not clean. Once you enter the public hospital premise, you'll find that there is a different smell altogether, and you feel like falling sick. So you can go in healthy and come out sick. That would not be a problem. That would not be surprising. Similarly, there can be other basic things that are needed there as well. So availability of so-and-so ICU units, right? Because there can be people who come in emergency who are critical patients, right? So availability for them. Availability of, say, oxygen cylinder that we face difficulty during COVID times. So these all basic problems related to infrastructure are being addressed here at Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers. Yes, you'll find that there is a problem. Most of the states, a lot of the states have covered their targets, have finished their targets for creating these Ayushman centers, but a lot of states have not. For example, the state of Rajasthan, for that matter. Now, it is mostly because of the political tussle that they have a different government in the state. At the center level, there is a different government, so they do not complete their targets, for that matter. Now, one idea is opening up these centers, etc. What you have to think is that, yes, you are making these centers available, you are opening up new centers, but you have to think about the quality of healthcare which will be provided there, because which can also remain under question. Now, there are various articles that keep coming up about various reports on these centers, etc. The government also came up with the second phase of it. So they were done with first phase, they came up with a report, but those reports will mostly be sugar coated. That is very obvious. So rather than going through those, yes, because whatever the targets are, they'll try to portray that all is well. But you do look at the critical analysis that comes up in your newspaper. There are various schemes that we are going to discuss here. Right? We are not going to get into details of these schemes, but you do have to remember that if there is a critical analysis in the newspaper, you read newspaper, you do not have to create separate notes unless until you find it important, but at least go through it so that you understand, because it is something that will help you with your understanding. I have left a question like this at the end of the chapter, to which you'll find it hard to answer. That question will be something that you'll find hard to answer, because it talks about implementation of the national health policy. If you think of implementation, there are various programs under national health policy. Do you have an idea of all the programs? No. Do you need that? Again, no. Also, the problem is, if you think of their implementation, you have very limited data, you have very limited reports. So what can be done? Now, how to go about it will be dealt again in the last chapter, but you have to think about it. That how do we do that? Because they have asked the question. They've asked questions like this in the past. And you do not have, say, sufficient content or data available for implementation of various programs, of all the programs of the government. But whatever you find, please do go through it. Yes, so Bharti, probably she's from Rajasthan, so she's saying that there is another scheme, Chiranjeevi Yojana, that is being implemented there. So that can be the case. So I was just giving you an example about Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers, because ultimately you find it is a state subject, but everything has to be, but most of the things at least have to be done in the larger framework of the policy decided by the government, by the central government, right? So yes, areas can have different needs, different regions can have different demands from people. Those have to be taken into account, but the larger framework should remain the same. Okay, so with this, we will conclude the session for today. What we'll do is, tomorrow we'll take up the whatever is left from health. We'll talk about various preventive and curative measures, but we will talk about them briefly, and we'll try to invest more time in questions. Okay, so whatever problems are there, you already know what are the problem. All you have to do is try to link it to the government measures. What kind of government intervention do you see in these areas? So when it comes to digitization, we will think about what problems it can address, what can be the various challenges, and then you right away jump into National Digital Health Mission, that what are its various aspects. So as we move more and more into paper 2, it'll be up to you, because you would have to invest more time understanding these things. So once you understand, all you have to do is you have to integrate whatever is there in your current affairs to your static, because that is something that would have to be done by you, right? Because new current affairs are coming up every day, even after we finish this syllabus. Yes, so many schemes overlap with center, states, etc. A lot of content is repeating. That is again a problem with your schemes, right? When you think about insurance, so when we think about the number of 30% of people who are uninsured, who do not have any kind of insurance, you'll find that the rest of the 70%, there are a lot of people who are covered under multiple schemes from the state, from their employer, from the central government, right? So which is a problem. Okay, so with this, let's conclude the discussion for today, and we'll start from digitization tomorrow, and we'll move on quickly to your issues related to education and the solutions for the same and national education policy. Thank you everyone, and good night.